Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Monday, August 15th. It is now another day closer to the start of the 2022 season. Ryan Roberts, the director of recruiting at Irish Breakdown, is with me. Brian Driscoll, the publisher at Irish Breakdown, and we've got a lot of Notre Dame topics to talk about. A couple things just before we get rocking and rolling. Number one, if there is breaking news during this show, and there's a chance it may happen, we will discuss it at the end of the show. This is also not a recruiting podcast, so I do not want to see the chat turning into a recruiting show or recruiting chat. Let's try and stay on topic about the team, and we'll get into that stuff in the end. The mailbag is always fair game for that type of stuff, so we are going to stay on topic for our show. A little bit of news dropped today. The Associated Press poll, Ryan, came out today. Notre Dame was ranked 5th, which is where they were in the coaches poll. They were also ranked 5th in the coaches poll, and this is the first time since Notre Dame ranked 2nd in the AP and 3rd in the coaches poll back in 2006 that Notre Dame has begun the season in the top 5. It does, however, mark the 4th straight year in which Notre Dame has begun the season in the top 10. So certainly, expectations are sky high for Notre Dame this season when you look at those preseason polls.
It's fun to see, man. I mean, honestly, I feel like for the first time in a while, I don't really argue too much against these preseason polls. You know, it's most of them have been kind of fair. I mean, I know we dissected a little bit of the coaches poll, but I mean, honestly, Brian, just outside of Notre Dame's 5th standing in the AP poll, I thought that it was a pretty fair ranking, if I'm being completely honest. There wasn't like a ton where I was like, that team is being massively overrated. Right. That team's being massively underrated. I was like, yeah, it's in number 5.
Except for USC. That's the only exception for me. Yeah. Yes. Right. No, I mean, that's the point, though, Ryan. We could normally go through that sucker and nitpick like half the dang rankings and be like, whoa, what the heck? I didn't see that this year. I really did.
Exactly. And I mean, it's nice. You know, Notre Dame's getting – and they usually do in a preseason for the most part, but they're getting the credit that I think that people are excited about to see this team. And it's been pretty consistent across the board of both the coaches and the AP polls. Right. So it's a good spot to be at number 5 to start.
Yeah. There was really only a couple big complaints that I had with the poll. And one is I mentioned USC, but I get it. I actually get USC. I actually am more understanding of USC at 14 after going 4-8 last year than I am Texas A&M being 6th. After going, 8-4 last year, and same coach. All they've done is lose coaches. They lost their O-line coach to USC. They lost Mike Elko, who's now the head coach at Duke, and lost some good players. And I know that they bought 37 defensive linemen. Signed to scholarship 37 defensive linemen this year. But I just don't see the Texas A&M stuff. We broke down the SEC predictions on Saturday. I don't see it with Texas A&M. But other than that, I mean, I think Baylor at 10 is probably going to look way too high when the season's over, but I'm also totally fine with them being 10 now because, again, they had success last year. You're actually putting a team too high based on the fact that they were really good last year, which I'm okay with, right? Was comfortable for Michigan State at 15. Would I have them 15th if we're just talking about a pure projection only? Probably not, but I think it's totally fair based on what they've done. I'm good with Miami being a team that's high. They're kind of the opposite of those other teams in that they're a projection a little bit, but Miami was okay last year. They had their moments last year. I'm comfortable with that. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you look at and say, okay, it makes sense. You know, you could nitpick a spot here, spot there. I was surprised that Iowa wasn't in the top 25. That's another one that continues to get me a little bit. You know, I think overall, I thought it was a very fair ranking. And I wonder if the Wake Forest ranking, I wonder when the votes were in, like maybe the votes came out before the news broke about Sam Hartman, because I do think that's a pretty big blow to Wake Forest. For those who don't know, Sam Hartman, the quarterback at Wake Forest, is out with an undisclosed injury or non-football related issue. Excuse me, not an injury. I want to make sure that I'm clear. I wonder, that's the only other one that I'm thinking that the way this usually works, that the voting was done before that news broke. That's that I am kind of thinking that with Wake Forest.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, based upon, and honestly, Brian, my biggest surprise on the list, personally, they didn't get Purdue in the top 25. They're the best team in Indiana.
I know, right? I mean, they're better than Notre Dame, clearly, says every moron that I've ever seen on Twitter. So I just had to address that one. That was, sometimes, Ryan, you and I talk all the time. I'm like, hey, look, let's be mindful of how we engage on Twitter, because you both and I have aggressive personalities. But sometimes you just got to do it. Sometimes people say things that are just so dumb, and then double down on their stupidity with another comment that's completely stupid. And like I said, sometimes people bring that, that social media violence on themselves, and it just had to be done. It had to be done.
You're my leader, so I'm learning from you. All right.
Yes.
So all my Twitter antics, I blame you upon this.
Yeah.
All right?
Hey, look, I'm the guy at the top, right? So when I do things like that, it's like, hey, you know what? I'm just following your example. So, and that's why I say when I talk to Ryan, look, don't be like me. Right? Don't do this. Learn from my example.
Really quick tangent, real quick. So I put on Twitter yesterday, the day before, that I was going to be nice on Twitter. Okay, I'm not going to be a jerk anymore. I literally, less than an hour later, almost quote tweeted something saying this is idiotic. But then I was like, oh no, I can't do that. So
it was from the same account. Wasn't it from the same account?
It may have been. I can't remember. But so I went back to my original tweet and I was like, wow, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be. It was literally less than an hour. It was like 57 minutes from the original tweet.
No doubt. So top 25 is out. AP and coaches poll sets up an epic matchup in the opener against Ohio State. Ohio State was number 2 in both polls. They were also 2 in the coaches poll, I believe. Correct? Obviously that's going to be a big matchup that we will be monitoring as well. So let's get on to our team show, Ryan. And our focus today is quarterbacks. We're going to talk quarterbacks today. And the discussion for Notre Dame is kind of, we're going to do sort of an overview. Here's kind of where things stand. And, quarterback, it's not going to be a preview per se. The camp has already started. It's more of a sort of an overview, where things are, what are expectations, what are we like about this unit, what are our concerns and questions about this unit. I think those are the things that you look at and start to evaluate and say, okay, let's kind of look at the team that way. And I think in that regard, you have to start, in my opinion, at quarterback. And that's why we are gonna start a quarterback. And because at the end of the day, all the other stuff we talk about, all the different position groups, they're all going to have an impact on where things are this season. But Notre Dame's ultimate success is going to due in large part to what happens at quarterback. That is going to be the same thing that we've said for years. This is going to be the thing that determines whether Notre Dame continues to be a 10-2 type of team that beats the teams they're supposed to, or whether they can take that final step. It's going to come down to quarterback play. Now we know, Ryan, who the starter is. We now know all those question marks are out. We know who the starter is. Now it's time to say, okay, what's it actually going to look like? And is the quarterback play for Notre Dame this year going to be good enough for the team to take that next step?
Quarterback's a separator, man. I mean, it usually is. I would argue, Brian, Notre Dame has had trouble in the big game recently, right? And I know some of that is to do to bad coaching in certain spots, so I'm not going to put it all on the quarterback. But we also saw in those games that the quarterback play just wasn't up to par, right? And I think that's the biggest separator, is that whether you're on a high school football team, a college football team, NFL team, if you have a dude at quarterback, that elevates the entirety of not only of just the performance of your offense, but also like just the aura around the team. I mean, like they feed off of a great quarterback. That's the thing. Like, it's the energy brought. And because whether a quarterback is, because Tyler Buckner's only going to be a sophomore. And I know that they have been really talking a lot about him being the alpha in the room and being a great leader and all that great stuff. And I'm sure he is. But whether he is ready for that role or not, he is the leader now. Right. He's the leader of this football team.
Ready or not, here it comes. I mean,
exactly.
No choice.
And it's hard for a sophomore. I mean, honestly, he's a sophomore playing major college football at one of the biggest brands of college football. It is not an easy thing for a young kid, 19, 20 years old, to step foot into that arena, in that spectrum, and be the dude from day one. But that's what's on his weight. It's not even just the simple fact of like, you need him to play really good football, which we'll talk about a ton. We also need him to be a leader on this team. Right. Like, and that's the biggest thing for me, is that there's a lot on his plate. I think he can handle it. Right. But regardless, I mean, it is a big task for a sophomore. There's no doubt about it.
And I think the leadership aspect is very interesting, Ryan. I think the leadership aspect is interesting because he needs to be a leader. But what I always find fascinating is that you've got to find the sweet spot for each individual player. And not everybody is going to be the same in regard to how they show leadership. Not everybody's vocal. Not everybody's a rah-rah guy. Not everybody's, going to get in a guy's face. Some guys lead just by like, hey, I'm going to go do my thing. And when I need to say something, I'll say something. And I think that's really where Tyler needs to be. He needs to be a number one. You need to go handle your business. You need to lead by example, how you prepare. Those are things you can control, Tyler. Like you can control, how you are in regard to, your preparation, right? Your experience doesn't have anything to do with that. You can be a first day freshman and still go out there and bust your tail and put in the work in the film room, put in the work in the weight room, put in the work in the field, be the first guy out, doing all those kind of things. That stuff is in your control and doesn't require experience per se. He's got to find his sweet spot. But I also think as you kind of look at the quarterback room as a whole, I think having Drew Pine on the roster, that's where he adds even more value, because Drew, from what I am told, is not taking a back seat from a leadership standpoint, nor is Notre Dame coaching staff asking him to take a back seat of that. So I think that's the key, is they're going to allow Drew to be himself as a personality. They're going to allow Drew to show leadership and to have a voice. And Drew is smart enough to understand when. Right? Like if Tyler's talking, Drew's not going to come bum rushing in like, hey, let's go. That you're not going to see that. But Drew's going to have a voice. And that's why in a lot of ways, and this may sound like an insult, but I truly don't mean it that way. I mean it 100% as a compliment. That's why Drew Pine is the perfect backup quarterback for Notre Dame this year, because he does have that mindset where Drew is not going to be afraid to walk into the room and show that leadership if it's needed to be done. And he's a smart kid, a savvy kid. And the fact that he is respected by his teammates allows him to step into that situation. And so, and that's why I thought it was smart for Freeman and Reese to both talk about how important Drew is to this team in the press conference announcing Tyler's a starter, and why it was so important for Tyler to talk about how important the relationship is between him and Drew. Like you could tell that they were all focused on, we've got to keep Drew locked in because he's very important to this team. And not just in the way that people talk about, if Tyler goes down or there's an injury or whatever. I'm just talking about on an everyday basis. Drew Pine's just not hanging out in the corner until Tyler goes down, and then he puts the coffee cup down and puts the clipboard down and takes off the jacket and runs in there in this dramatic scene. No, he's going to be important every single day. Sure. And because he brings that to the table, which then the reason that matters is because I think that allows Tyler Buchner to more naturally grow into a leadership role that he is comfortable with, where it doesn't have to be this all the time. And that is something that we have heard from Tommy Reese as well, privately and publicly, privately from sources and then publicly from Tommy Reese, is that Tyler has kind of grown into a leadership role this offseason. So that's an important thing. But look, end of the day, Ryan, when you talk about the Notre Dame quarterback, leadership's important, right? Work ethic's important. All those things are important, but it's going to come down to, can you make plays, and can you make plays in the big moments and in the big games? And I think that's going to be the key to this. And that's where I want to transition now specifically to Tyler as a player. So we talked about the expectations, right? The expectations are that Tyler Buchner has to go out there and play like a big-time talent. Right. That's the expectations, because the expectations isn't, hey, well, let's let him get a year under his belt, and then next year we can go out and, maybe be good. Right. The next year approach. Nope. This is a football team. You have too many talented players. You have too many guys in their last season to where, hey, look, you're not going to have Isaiah Foskey next year. You're not going to have Michael Mayer next year. You're not going to have certain guys next year. How about you go out and try to win with those guys now? And that's going to be the expectation for Tyler Buchner this year. So he's going to have to play like someone who's being expected to lead a playoff football team. And that's the expectation. So the question now, Ryan, is what are the things that we look at with Tyler Buchner that give us the confidence? Because I think you and I are in the same boat here with no one knows what Tyler's going to do, but there's a confidence level on this show, I believe. And it's taken all of us different times to get there. But now I think we're there where you look at it and say, hey, listen, the talent's there. Will he get there this year? I don't know. But I do want to kind of break down what it is really that makes us so confident in Tyler Buchner, and then what he can do for the offense. So just to begin with, Ryan, when you evaluate his high school film, when you evaluate what he did last year, what are the things you look at and say, okay, that's why I think this kid has a chance to be something different at Notre Dame?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me to start, Brian, is actually something that's not on the film. It's something that is more isolated to what the people around him talk about and what the interviews show me of him. And that's that I think that he brings a really cool and calm demeanor at all times. Because I mentioned like being a sophomore starting quarterback at the University of Notre Dame, that can be extremely difficult, obviously. But having the personality that he has, where he just seems like he's never too high, he's never too low. He has kind of that even keel to him. I think that's huge, right? Because I think if Tyler Buchner makes a mistake this year, throws a bad interception, gets off to a slow start in a game, I think that he has the personality to kind of get himself out of it, right? Like that's kind of where I like that never too high, never too low type of personality, because I think that you can kind of pick yourself up from there. So that is a big thing for me. And it's tough to see sometimes with quarterbacks. And that's what makes, whether it's a high school to college transition or a college to NFL draft transition, it's tough sometimes to really distinguish those things because there's a lot of quarterbacks on the NFL level that don't pan out that had nothing to do with talent, right? Like it's a personality thing, it's a work ethic thing, it's a leadership thing. I think Tyler has all those things. Now on film, we're talking about a dynamic player, right? Like this is a dual threat kid who is one of the better athletes on the team, pound for pound, in my opinion.
Let's remind people of this.
Yeah.
This is a kid that I believe his first scholarship offer came as an 8th grader, and it was from the University of Michigan to play lacrosse. So you're talking about a kid who was considered one of the best lacrosse players on the West Coast. And if you've ever seen I don't understand lacrosse, but one thing I know athleticism and a sport that requires and demands athleticism, and it does it. So to back up your point about the athleticism, Ryan, that says a lot right there.
And as a junior in high school, what was it? Over 1,600 yards, 22 touchdowns, like over 10 yards a carry. It's pretty easy to see on film. And even what he did last year in his designated role, he's a really dynamic athlete, man. He's physical, he's fast, he's explosive. You can see those traits and be like, okay, this dude's a different type of athlete. But I really do think that overshadows, in my opinion, the fact that he's a pretty quick processor for a younger kid. Like he gets through stuff. He has good eyes. And I think his arm strength is good in that regard, right? So I think tangibly from a all-around player, from a dual threat perspective, he's got every tool in the book.
Right.
The talent is all there. The biggest thing for me is just, the kid hasn't played a ton of football. So just getting him comfortable. As he gets more comfortable, I just think that talent is just going to take over the film because there's no question, in my opinion, on the talent level of Tyler Buchner. The kid has special traits as an athlete.
And I think Marcus Freeman talked about this at the very beginning of the press conference, announcing that he was going to be the starting quarterback, because he talked about we need to add that dynamic running ability to quarterback. And, when you talk about the depth issues at receiver, the fact that not only do you have not many receivers, a lot of those guys haven't panned out, haven't proven themselves yet, right? Even a guy like Lorenzo Styles, Ryan, who you're extremely high on, we're sitting here today saying, hey, we think he's got a chance to be really good. But we've got to see it, right? He's got to prove it. Even Braden Lindsey's a 5th-year senior. He's got a lot to prove. The only experienced proven receiver you had just is out for the year now because with Avery Davis. You have a tight end that's that way. Your running back depth chart, same thing. We think it's got a chance to be one of the 5 to 10 best backfields in the entire country. But they've got to go out and prove it. It's very unproven. Nobody had more than 300 rushing yards last year. Nobody on the roster has 800 career rushing yards, much less 1,000 career rushing yards. Matter of fact, the depth chart as a whole, Ryan, barely tops 1,000 when you add them all together as rushers. Well, now you've got a quarterback in Tyler Buchner that as a scrambler and as a runner can take some of that pressure off. I think we'll get into, we've discussed this before. We'll talk about a little bit more later about maybe you need to be smart about how much you use him in certain games. But the reality is you now have a quarterback that you have to account for on every single play. And, 100%. With last year with Notre Dame and even with Ian Book, and this isn't an insult to Ian Book because Ian Book was really athletic. He made a lot of plays with his legs, but they didn't have to account for him in the run game. And it's not Ian's fault per se. It's that they just didn't do a lot of stuff with him on designed runs. They'd occasionally run like a 3rd and 1 outside zone, Q outside zone, which I never understood because that play almost never worked. I never understood that. But they didn't have a lot of design calls. They weren't running read zone a lot with Tyler, with Ian Book, even though he was an athletic kid. Well, now you're going to have design called reads. You're going to have RPOs. They're going to build in, a handoff, a pass. You're going to have RPOs are going to be a pass that have built in a draw if the defense vacates the box, all those type of things, and all while taking advantage of that. And as a defensive staff, when you have a quarterback that you have to legitimately account for in the run and pass game, it makes it a lot tougher, in my opinion, to focus on all those other areas. And so I think that's a big part of why Tyler Buchner's dynamic running ability needs to be where we lead this conversation off of, is because he already brings it, but it's needed even more so this year because of some of the injuries and the depth concerns at other positions. And if Tyler can be that player, it is going to present a very unique set of problems that the quarterback last year, everybody knows I'm a Jack Cohn supporter. I thought he did a really nice job last year when given the opportunity, all those type of things. But this is a whole different animal for Notre Dame when you have a kid like this, even more so than Ian Book. You haven't had a runner like this since Brandon Wimbush. And for all the concerns about Tyler as a passer, we'll get into those here in a second. You saw in 2017 what Notre Dame did in the run game with a quarterback who was barely a 50% passer that year. With talk about receiver issues, Notre Dame tried to beat Georgia with Freddie Canteen and Cam Smith in the starting lineup. You know what I mean? Like, we've seen this story written before, and I would argue that the talent around Tyler Buchner is significantly better than what the talent was surrounding Brandon Wimbush in 2017 at the skill positions. Offensive line, maybe a different conversation. Still going to be pretty good. And so I think for me, we have seen this story before with Notre Dame, and we saw how impactful Josh Adams was. A 1,400-yard runner, and teams were still having a game plan to stop Brandon. And it was opening up big plays for Josh Adams. We saw that. And Tyler brings that to the table. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off, Ryan, those other position groups, and allows them to say, hey, you don't have to go be Will Fuller. You don't have to go be these type of things. You've got to go out there and just make sure that you're doing what you need to do, your job, and then trust Tyler's going to get you the ball, but then also know that you're going to get some number one stuff. That's going to be the key.
Here's a cliche you hear all the time. The quarterback makes everybody around him better. How does Tyler Buchner do that? I think tangibly you need to ask yourself, well, how does he do that? He's not running the routes for the wide receivers, right? He's not running inside zone and staying on his track and staying patient and doing all that type of stuff as a running back. How he makes somebody better is, let's start with the offensive line. When you have the run threat that Tyler Buchner has in an inside zone look, you're going to keep one defender out of the box. You're going to automatically do that. It's going to leave less players in the box for the offensive line to handle. And also, there will be some times where you're going to be reading that end man on the line of scrimmage where offensive line-wise, you don't have to block that man, right? Like, so it's a one less guy for an offensive line to block. How does it make the running back game better? Well, running back is also running into a smaller box, in theory, as long as the quarterback is reading correctly out of it. Wide receiver-wise, when you have a really talented quarterback, that safety, I'm going to try to get him a little more into the box. I'm going to try to get the extra man up, which means there's going to be a lot more one-on-one opportunities. So it is a cliche, but in Tyler Buchner's case, with the dual threat that he is, he literally does make everybody around him better, because the numbers game should always be in their advantage, because there has to be a player that always has to account for the running ability that Tyler Buchner has. So he literally is the key to this offense, because he can take pressure off of everyone. Not just the offensive line, not just the running game, not just the receivers. He can take it off of everyone. And also what it gives is Tommy Rees gets a nice little wrinkle in this offense too, where he's like, wow, now I can do this, this, and this, and this. There's going to be a lot of things in this offense this year that, all due respect to Jack Cohn, you weren't running with Jack Cohn. I mean, you just weren't. And it's no disrespect to him. It's just not his style.
You weren't doing it with Ian Book either.
Style.
Right.
100%. Yeah. I mean, like you just said, Ian Book was a pretty athletic kid, but you weren't running a bunch of the read zone and all that type of stuff with him.
Because, Ryan, there's a difference. There's a difference in you talk about this in the NFL too. There's a difference between an athletic quarterback and a running quarterback, or a quarterback who's a runner, even if he's not a Brandon Wimbush type of runner. And that matters. That has to be pointed out, because it does change how you game plan. It's one thing to have a guy that, like, so for Ian Book, for example, when Ian Book was playing, you had to account for him. And if you want to look at the NFL, it's the difference between defending Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Like Patrick Mahomes is going to use his athleticism in the pass game, and you have to game plan for that. Josh Allen can use his athleticism in the pass game and the run game, and you have to prepare for that differently, which is going to create opportunities because you talked about the safeties peaking against the run, Ryan. It is also true that they have to peak against the pass. You bail 7 guys, drop 7 guys into coverage, and Tyler Buckner's turning a 3rd and 9 into a first down. Remember the USC game, right? And what did Brandon Wimbush go, like 9 of 19 in that game? But he converted a 3rd and 10 with his legs because the defense dropped and Brandon just nothing was there and just took off running. So you have to account for that in the pass game as well, Ryan, which then allows you to be in situations where even still you're going to get those one-on-ones in the perimeter because you're going to have to account for somebody even in the pass game for Tyler Buckner. And I think, again, that's where it gets to where, again, there's a difference between being athletic and being a runner. And
Sure.
that's the key. That's the key.
And you just mentioned a great point. I mean, I can imagine like 3rd and 7 and Tyler Buckner just scrambles for 8. You know what I mean? Like, and that is the most, we're talking about how it's affecting the players around him right now. And I kind of started this conversation. It also affects the defense a ton because that is deflating.
Yes.
We're not even talking about just the fact of like, I have to defend the run. I have to defend the pass. There's multiple reads off of the zone, like all that type of stuff. It's also, wow, 3rd and 7. I have perfect pass coverage and Tyler Buckner runs for 9. And that is stuff that you just can't account for sometimes, man. And it is so frustrating. So it's literally deflating to a defense when you have a player like this. Because even when there's nothing there, this is the biggest point for me. Even when there's nothing there, Tyler Buckner can make something happen. He has that type of athleticism and that type of upside.
Well, Ryan, I mean, just think we talk about Brandon Wimbush a lot, and I'm only comparing the two as runners, but we saw a situation like this in 2018 in the win over Michigan as well. You know, Notre Dame is up 21-10. Offense is sputtering, through an interception. You punt it on your last 3 and out on your last attempt. Now you're backed up 3rd and 18. Michigan's starting to get some momentum. It's 21-10. And I can't remember. I think it was Josh. Was it Josh Ross? I can't remember who it was coming off the edge. Hits Brandon in the backfield on 3rd and 18. Brandon spins out, takes off running, and converts it on a 3rd and 18. Notre Dame goes down and kicks a field goal to go up 24-10. That proved to be a big moment in that game because now Michigan needed a touchdown, right? And to tie, right? And then, of course, you were able to make some stops, but like plays like that matter. And so I think that is why it is important to talk about the running ability. Having said that, that's not where my confidence on this comes from. I think that there's, to me, Tyler's dynamic running ability kind of takes some pressure off other units, like you mentioned, offensive line, running backs, receivers. But for this offense to truly take that next step, he has to be an effective thrower of the football. And we both agree on that. And, I think that's the part of his game that right now is the biggest question mark and is the area that's going to determine just how good he's going to be. Now, when I say question mark, there's 2 different ways to look at this. One is the question mark of people who only are evaluating Tyler based on what he did last year. The problem with that is you're not looking at Tyler Buckner as a player that was being thrown into the game to be an every down quarterback. His role last year was to be a runner. Drew Pine actually got a decent amount of reps last year in practice as sort of the number 2 quarterback, which is why when Jack Cohn struggled in a couple games before Virginia Tech, it was Drew that they turned to, not Tyler. Now, in I think it was the Wisconsin game, that made sense because Tyler was injured, and had the hamstring issue. Although if he was the starter, from what I'm told, he could have played on it. But because they were using him as the runner, Drew was sort of the backup quarterback. The reason they went with Tyler against Virginia Tech is what we talked about the other day. They were at the point at that time where they're like, look, the pass rush is getting after it. We need to put the runner in. And they were kind of at the point where it's like, if we may have to, it may be time to make a move because of how bad the offensive line is playing. So Tyler wasn't getting the work running the whole offense last year. His role was, this kid is too dynamic to not play. And how we're going to use his ability this year is as a runner. We need that with the offensive line struggles, with being young at running back and different things. They needed that part of it. The second question is that even people who are proponents of Tyler as a passer, like myself, have to, if they're going to be honest and objective, have to look at and say, We haven't really seen him run an offense in 3 years, number one. And number two, he has altered his mechanics a little bit since he was last the starting quarterback. So you look at that and say, okay, that's a legitimate question. Having said that, I think there are some people that are significantly discounting Tyler's ability as a passer of the football. And for some of the people that I've talked to, a big part of that comes down to the fact that he has unorthodox mechanics. And there are just some, despite all the evidence in the world, that just believe you can't be a pocket passer if you don't have a traditional throwing motion. And I would argue I think that's not accurate. I think number one. I think number two, it also misses the modern game. I mean, how Patrick Mahomes has a very clean throwing motion when he's just sitting in the pocket. But if you break down the game, Patrick Mahomes is going to have a lot of throws that aren't with his traditional throwing motion, right? You know, if Patrick Mahomes was at a quarterback derby, you know, or making a quarterback teach tape, it would look, man, that thing's pretty. But then you watch him play and you're like, maybe half the throws he makes that way, you know, because there's so many different, RPOs require different arm angles, avoiding pressure. There's got to be a little bit of playmaker to him, and that is aided by someone who can throw with varying arm angles. And Tyler has a naturally low throwing motion, which I think aids his ability to throw at different arm angles. But at the end of the day, I don't care about his mechanics. I care about, does the ball get there accurately, on time, and with enough zip to make sure that the ball gets completed. So as we break down his pass game, Ryan, I think number one, the reason that I'm confident in Tyler as a thrower is one of the things we saw from him in high school. One of the things we saw from him in his first spring at Notre Dame. So this isn't this spring, but the spring before. One of the things we saw from him even at times last year, one of the things you saw from him in practice firsthand in the spring, and then one of the things we've seen from some of the practices and some of the people that I've talked to this year are, this is a kid that has a very, very good mind for the game. And I think that's something a lot of people are missing. This kid is a really smart quarterback. And there's a stigma that comes with being athletic as a quarterback. It's always been that way. You can go all the way back to, John Elway and Steve Young and Randall Cunningham. There's always a stigma that comes with being an athletic quarterback. And that is that they're a bit street ball. And that is true maybe with some, but with others, with a lot, especially the great ones, they have minds for the game. And I think that's the part of this that Tyler is not getting enough credit for. His anticipation, his decision-making for his age are really good. Now, he got baited into a bad throw last year against Virginia Tech. That's part of the learning process. But this is a kid that has a very good mind for the game, and you don't throw for 4,400 yards and 58 touchdowns at any level if you don't have a mind for the game.
Well, I mean, and let's give Virginia Tech some credit for a second, right? Like, they were designing coverages a little bit more. They were rolling down some coverage, and they baited him into, what was it, a cover 2 look, right? I think the corner kind of just sat there and played the flat, right? So, I mean, sometimes defensive coordinators are smart, it's going to happen. And I hate to tell everybody, breaking news, Tyler Buchner's going to throw an interception this year. He's going to throw a couple.
Yeah, and he's going to throw a couple ugly ones, right?
Yes, it's going to happen. He's a sophomore that has played one season as a starter in the last 3 years. That is the fact of the matter to this conversation, right? But I agree with you, Brian. It's the biggest thing. And I was talking about this from a personality perspective, but it goes the same with, he comes off to me as a very studious young man. Like, that's what he pops to me. You can tell that he really is articulate in how he sees the game. You can tell that he really enjoys kind of understanding the game at a deeper level. You can see those things. And then, I mean, honestly, I saw one live spring practice, and I'm basing this a little bit on one live spring, but his eyes are good, man. They're pretty good. He sees things. He was holding safeties in this game, in the practice that I saw. I know that I've talked to Vince in the past about, a couple things that he saw of Tyler in a couple practices he's been, and he's talked to me, same thing. Like, the eyes just look like they're moving quick. They're moving, very fluidly through the process. And I think that those are big time things, because I think there is a misnomer about the arm strength a little bit. I mean, somebody was just talking about it on the message board earlier about like a noodle arm.
Yeah,
right?
some guy was like on the message board, like, a friend of mine said that Tyler Buchner has a noodle arm. And I'm like, and he goes, is that accurate, or is my friend full of baloney? And I didn't have the patience for it today. I just said, your friend's full of baloney. Right.
Yes. I know. I was just like,
dive into this, right? Because Tyler Buchner does not have a cannon. He does not have Malik Zaire's arm strength. He does not have Brandon Wimbush's arm strength. He has the arm strength, however, to make all the throws he needs to make in this offense.
100%. Yeah. Now, there's no limiting arm strength to him. Does he have the strongest arm that we've seen of a Notre Dame quarterback coming through? Not right now, and probably will never get there, but it's still a good arm, man. Like, he can make every level of the throw up. I mean, we saw just a little, just little sample size of it last year, but I mean, you even think of the bucket throw to Kevin Austin in the Virginia Tech game. Like, that throw takes some arm strength to complete outside the numbers. Like, that's not like a little, just quick dink or something, man. Like, he has good arm strength to him. And I think that the biggest thing for me, Brian, is one thing that you mentioned. I'm not as worried about the upper body mechanics either. I'm worried about the lower body mechanics. And he has a strong lower half, man. As long as he's able to find that power in his lower half and keep a good base, I have no worries about the arm strength. It is going to be good and sufficient in that regard.
I have two things about what you just said, Ryan. Number one is that is one of the most notable things that I had when we did that. We'll repeat it now because it's been a while, but I dropped that pre-camp intel piece on the message board. And the most surprising thing to me that I had in there, I believe I had this in there, was that how good he was compared to the other quarterbacks when it came to mechanics. His mechanics were really clean. I think Vince talked about that in the first practice, how his footwork was just really clean. And I think that's always the issue I have. And I think we discussed this last week a little bit too. That's always my concern when you talk about a quarterback throwing off script and off platform is and changing arm angles does his feet need to be, are they where they need to be? Because that's when you have throw sail or dive or miss, is when your feet get you in trouble. And when you'd watch Tyler Buchner just drive a ball into the ground, I've seen Brandon Wimbush drive balls into the ground. Brandon Wimbush can throw the ball 70 yards. He's got a cannon for an arm. I've seen him just drive a little look screen into the ground. Why? It's mechanics. It was the mechanics were wrong. With Brandon, it was upper body. Brandon just could never get his release point. He was never comfortable with his release point at Notre Dame. They completely ruined his throwing motion. He could never just snap the ball off because it was so mechanical because he just wasn't confident in what he was doing. With Tyler, it's not an upper body thing. It was a lower body thing when he would have mistakes and misses, accuracy misses. And so I think when you go back and watch his high school film, even when you watch him last year, his ball placement is actually pretty good. When Tyler got off is when he would rush his mechanics. He had a couple throws against Virginia Tech where they baited him into an interception. That's part of the learning process. You can't make those mistakes, but he's seen it now. There were throws he sailed the ball because his feet got out of whack. His feet weren't where they needed to be, and he would just miss. And those are the things that you continue to work on and work out, and that's what we've seen Tommy Rees really working on in the spring and fall and in the summer and now fall camp is making sure Tyler's feet are repeatable, right? And make sure they're able to get in the place he needs to be. And when that happens, he throws the ball well. The only question I have with Tyler as a passer is not so much arm strength as much as I just need to see him be able to take the top off of a defense. We haven't seen him do that. We've seen him throw the outside go routes, and that's fine. I mean, you're not throwing that ball 60 yards. I mean, if you do, you're really late on the read. That's a throw where you're hitting the top of your drop and you're just letting her rip. And like we saw the throw to Kevin Austin, I mean, it was a 40-plus yard throw, and it dropped it right over his outside shoulder, and Kevin even kind of drifted outside a little bit on the throw, and it still dropped like right down the middle, but the ball was placed on the outside shoulder. Kevin drifted, and it got caught right here. There was the backside seam route he threw to Avery Davis in that game, which I thought was a really strong throw that you saw him working through his read. That was not his primary read. He came back to the backside seam in that throw. And so I think those are the things you look at Tyler and you're saying, we know he can make those throws, but we have not seen him do, and we didn't even see him do it a ton in high school, is just because he wasn't asked to do it, is can you bang that backside post route over the top? Can you take that front side over the top post route on a high-low concept where the safety comes up and you got to launch it over the top and get it over top of the corner? Those are the throws I need to see him make, Ryan. That's the only thing that I question. And the only reason I question it is just because we haven't seen him do it. I think he's got the arm strength for it based on other throws he's made. But that's my question is, can he knock that throw out? That's the one thing that I need to see. Okay, if he can make that throw, then this offense becomes scary, because that's the one thing you say, if this kid can throw it over our head, he becomes really hard. And when I'm talking about throwing over your head, it's not about throwing over the corners' heads. That's easy to do. You can do that on a 15-yard comeback route, the way the corners play. It's the safeties. Can you throw it over the safeties' heads? Because they are sort of the new – if you're going to have a team that's spying on a quarterback, It's going to be at the linebacker and safety level. That's the reality of it. And if the safeties can't come down because they're afraid of Tyler throwing it over their head, then that puts you in a really tough spot. Because you could go cover one and then play that true free, but now you've exposed yourself up the seams, and now that's where who's the guy that's going to be working up the seams? It's that number 87. Yep. Right. So now you're in a situation where in order to still do it, you've got to play differently. So you'd like to be able to still play quarters. But if you're playing quarters against Tyler Buchner, because you know which side he's going to, and the reason I say, let's explain that. Yep. Quarters is in a traditional sense, like it is 4 deep. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the modern quarters, right? Where safeties, their first response is really kind of either flat footing or stepping down because they're alley players, and it's the corners that are playing the post, right? If you can beat them over the top in that look, then they're just going to have a hard time defending you that way. But if you can't beat it over the top, it's a great defense to have because it's easy for you to essentially have, for all intents and purposes, Ryan, you're 9 in the box.
Yep.
Because whatever side you run to, that safety inserts. They may not line up a 9 in the box because there's 2 safeties back. But for all intents and purposes, they're going to have 9 in the box because they can get to the alley's field side and they get the alley boundary side in a quarters defense. And that's going to be the best way to defend a kid like Tyler Buchner, is to be able to play quarters defense. And that's why I harp so much on, can he bang that post over the top? Can he launch that deep seam route, down the field against a safety where you've taken the corner out with maybe a deep comeback or a deep corner or deep out where you've now neutralized that corner, that quarters corner with an outside route, and now that safety has to open and run with your seam or with, and those are the things you look at and say, hey, if he can make that throw, then this offense becomes really, really scary. That's why I keep harping on that downfield, over the top, middle of the field type of throw, because we haven't seen him do it, but that's the one that will scare defenses the most. It just will. They're going to be willing to give up a couple one-on-ones outside. They just are. But can you beat them over the top?
Yeah, and at Notre Dame, Brian, I mean, we've talked a bunch about the lack of depth at wide receiver, but one thing that they don't lack is they got some speed, man. I mean, even with Avery Davis going down, they still have Brain Lindsey, who's got speed. Lorenzo Styles Jr. was just on the freaks list. Like, he's a very athletic kid. Tobias Merriweather is going to win deep differently than those guys, but he can still do it. He's still a vertically oriented type of kid, as is Deion Colsey, if he is able to take that step. So you have guys that can win those routes. And the best thing about that, too, in my opinion, is there's going to be some games where, like, it's just not going incredible, right? But the ability to hit that explosive play is what kind of flips momentum in your favor. And I think that you're going to have those opportunities because, like you're saying, they are going to have to account for Tyler Buchner. So they're going to try to get that extra defender up in the box. They're going to try to bring that extra guy into the alley. They're going to try to get those extra defenders to make sure the run does not kill you. And it's understandable. So when that happens, you need to be able to stretch it vertically. You're going to be able to take the top off, to your points. Like, you need those guys that are able to do that, because, again, if you are, then wow, we really need to start defending from the roof a little bit better. Oh, and then here comes Michael Mayer on a wide open inside dig, or a seam route kind of underneath a backside post, or whatever it is, or an over route with the backside post. Those things will unlock this offense, and Tyler Buchner could do this because just his running threat is going to give you numbers advantage from the roof at times. And if he's able to hit those things, then at that point, you're a defensive coordinator's in quarrel. He's like, oh man, what do I do now? Like, I need to start getting creative. I need to start bringing extra pressure or do this, do that. He gets out of his comfort zone because he's like, I think the biggest misnomer for me, and this is purely my opinion, but as a defensive guy who is drawn to the defensive side of the football, Brian, when I called the defense, I did not want to blitz. I didn't want to. I want to get home with 4, and I want to be creative on the second and third levels. That's how you create a lot of chaos and people thinking. I'm bringing pressure when I feel like bringing pressure. I don't want to bring pressure because I'm in quarrel. We're like, oh my God, I got no answers here.
Yeah.
So I got to do.
What have I always said, Ryan? Any good coach, any good defensive coach, in my opinion, is going to have a philosophy as, I want to blitz when I want to blitz, not because I have to. When you get in a situation where you have to blitz, you're in trouble. Some may hit, but it's like we talked about the other day. Some are going to miss. And when they miss, with Lorenzo Styles, Braden Lindsey, Chris Tyree, Logan Diggs, Audric Estime, Tyler Buckner, Tobias Merriweather, when you have those kind of Michael Mayer, when you have those kind of athletes and you miss their big plays. And that's the risk that you run with this defense that maybe you like. Teams loaded the box a ton against Notre Dame in 2020. And there was no fear of Notre Dame hurting them. And there was 2 reasons for that, Ryan. Number one, 3 reasons really. Number one is Ian Book had not shown a willingness to throw the ball down the field in big games, right? No, the one game he did, he had a lot of success, Clemson, in the regular season. That's number one. Number two, Notre Dame did not use Ian Book as a runner. So there really wasn't that threat of him. And then number 3, at the playmaker level, they didn't have home run hitters in the 2020 offense outside of Chris Tyree. So when he wasn't on the field, you were worried about the size of the receiving core. And Avery Davis is fast, but they didn't use Avery Davis really as a vertical player all that much. I think, the Clemson play obviously was big, but he was more often than not working the short to intermediate zones. So there really wasn't that vertical threat. And so teams are allowed to play Notre Dame really aggressively in 2020. This offense is different, not schematically so much, personnel-wise. That offense had one dynamic home run hitter that played much. Because remember, in 2020, Braden Lindsey got hurt in fall camp, was banged up most of the year, comes back for the Pitt game, gets hurt again against Pitt, and he just was never the same guy. So you didn't have him that year. Kevin Austin played, 2 games, got hurt, and was out for the year. All your speed was gone at receiver. You had Javon McKinley, Ben Skoranek, Avery Davis, who they didn't use as a speed guy from the slot. And then Kyron Williams, as great as he wasn't a speed guy. You weren't afraid of him beating you for 80 yards. No, he had a run like that, but it wasn't because of his speed. It was a different type of run. You can't defend Notre Dame that way now, Ryan. You can't defend Notre Dame where, hey, look, we're just going to, come down and be aggressive because we're not afraid of getting behind us. You have to be afraid now of them getting behind you. That's the only thing that I would be concerned about with these receivers right now if I'm an outsider looking in. Hey, I don't know if these guys can play, but I do know they can run. If you're Notre Dame's coach, think about this, Ryan. If you're Notre Dame's coaches and you're looking at this team and you're saying, okay, well, this is the defense that we run. And, we have a game, them playing against that type of defense, right, against Oklahoma State. One of our starters in the secondary is a guy that started in that game. What's the one thing Notre Dame did that whole game, especially early? They just ran right by him. They're just running by guys, which is why Oklahoma State kind of came up and did what they did. Hey, look, our only chance in this game is to just beat them up at the line of scrimmage. And that's kind of what they did. And you can't, you're going to try to see them do that again. But, to me, the one thing that I do know this group can do is run. And so are other teams. What I don't know, can they get off the line? Can they effectively get open with their top ends? Can they work to find open spots in the zones now that Avery Davis is gone? Those things are all big question marks of receiver. But the one thing I know, Ryan, is they can run. And the other teams are going to know that too. And so it's going to make it very interesting to see how they defend it. Because if the pass game is rolling and it's truly being the complement to the run game, 2 things are going to happen that are going to scare the mess out of teams. Number one, what we talked about, can you bang the vertical stuff over in the middle? Deep seams against cover 4, or if they're playing man, taking the top off of stuff with post routes and go, those type of different things. But then the other one is sort of the stuff that's working across, because with Tyler Buckner, you're going to have that second level is going to be a little bit more aggressive coming down. And then if you can protect those deep routes, then what that does is the stuff that Alabama killed people with in 2020. Alabama absolutely murdered defenses in 2020 with Devontae Smith finding that spot in the sort of it's not intermediate, it's not deep, it's sort of that deep intermediate, I guess, where they would take the top off the defense. And they would design it this way. Sark was great at this. He would take his 2 front side receivers or his 1 backside receiver, depending on where they were bringing Devontae from, and just run off the front side. Just take the safeties in the corner out, and then you'd have Devontae would kind of then find that sweet spot in behind the linebackers, and because they ran the safeties off, there was this big window over top. And then when they would do it off a play action, it made it even better because you had to respect Najee Harris, and you're seeing Devontae Smith. Like, how is this guy getting that open? It's because it was
because you have no mid-hole defender.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right, because you got to protect the deep stuff, and then you got to protect against Najee because you also know they're going to dump it down to Najee in space, and he's going to go do something with it. That's what makes you so dangerous to defend. So and I know Tommy Rees is going to design that stuff because we saw him doing it in the second half of the year when he finally felt confident they could get the quarterback some time to throw. Did it against Georgia Tech, I think the first play of the game. And he did it really early against Stanford as well, and he was doing it with Kevin Austin, where he was finding that spot kind of behind the linebackers in front of the deep coverage. And if you can do that with Tyler Buchner, quarterback, then that is now where you start getting really like defenders, coaches are like, what the heck? Like, what am I supposed to do now? Now that is not, and here's why this is important. All that stuff we just talked about is not dependent on having Devontae Smith, right? It's not dependent on having elite receivers. It's stuff schematically. If you just have good players, can work because of how dynamic your quarterback is. Because we're talking about all that with a quarterback at Alabama in 2020 that went into the playoff, Ryan, with -9 rushing yards on the season.
Sure.
So that's why we talk about why it's important to have a kid like Tyler that can make plays with his legs, because it's just another example of how that's taking the pressure off of your receiving core, which you have questions about going into the season. Notre Dame referring, not you, Ryan, but you.
I got you. And to your point about the middle of the field stuff too, Brian, I think when we always talk about RPOs, we always talk about that overhang defender, right? That you're kind of riding to see if he's going to come into the box or stay out there. But to your point also, it's the middle linebacker that if he gets sucked up, that's what makes that little arrow route or slant or whatever you want to call it off the RPO. That's why that thing gets always wide open, right? It's because they can't establish leverage working inside out anymore if you're a coverage linebacker. So those things are huge. And it's something where that is a great way to also get Tyler Buchner comfortable throwing just to the middle of the field in general, because that's one thing for young quarterbacks at times is like throwing outside the numbers one-on-one, like doing all that type of stuff. That stuff comes easy usually, right? Throwing in the middle of the field, sometimes you get like that kind of like, oh, is there a defender leaking down into
a lot more bad things can happen over the middle of the field than a one-on-one shot on the outside.
Yep. I just think about like robber coverages or like, disguising that safety and bringing him down as a mid-hole defender instead of dropping back the single high. Like, there's so
Ryan,
many
if you
things.
miss outside, a lot of times, as long as you just way underthrow it, it's going to just be an incomplete pass. If you miss over the middle on a dig route and the ball hits a guy's hands, it can get picked off by the guy in front. It can get picked off the guy in behind. There's so many bad things that can happen. And that's like, I think Ian Book had that problem. It's like he would freeze. He just couldn't make that throw, to your point, because it can get in your head. Like last time I threw this ball, it got tipped and picked off. It's a throw that requires some guts. Even if a guy's open, it's a mindset thing that not all quarterbacks have.
And a lot of interceptions happen when teams are in some type of zone coverage. That happens because their eyes are back to the line of scrimmage. They can see things happening in front of them. Typically, outside corners are going to play more man than what you're going to see in the middle of the field, almost always, right? Like linebackers are going to zone drop. Safeties are going to play their, deep middle or halves or whatever, deep third, whatever they're working with in that scenario. And their eyes are back to the line of scrimmage. So throwing over the middle in those cases, those linebackers they're zone dropping. Like they have their eyes to the quarterback and they are reading eyes in that regard too. So those things could be a little tough. But to your point, Brian, if you have players that can run guys off, that can threaten vertically, that opens the middle of the field so much. Off of RPO, off of regular just kind of pass concepts, opening that middle of the field for a younger quarterback is paramount. Don't make them overthink it. Scheme it open so that they now get comfortable not only attacking the outside, but also attacking the middle of the field. I think that's huge, and I think it's big time.
And those are a lot of times things, Ryan, that come with simplified reads. Like, not every play, and this is true of the most complex and matter of fact, it's actually even more true of the complex systems, where there are a lot of times, like you watch, and you're a Rams fan, tell me if this is not true. There are times when Sean McVay has like these really complex, not complex, the guys know, but they're all doing that not with the intention of, well, we're hoping one of these guys gets open. They're all doing that because they think they know what coverage is coming and then think they can use all that stuff to open up so-and-so coming across on a drag route or on an undercut or one of those type of things. And so you may have 5 guys en route, but your read is really 2 guys. It's I'm banging this deep drag over the top, or I'm checking it down to my running back in the flats. All the other stuff is just used to manipulate the defense. Now, a quarterback's going to be savvy enough that if a guy blows a coverage outside, you're still banging the go route. But more often than not, you're isolating that. And those are things that when Tommy Rees, I think, has had some really good schemes with that last year, late in the year, that's the stuff that you say that is also, it may look complicated, but you're actually simplifying that for your young quarterback. Not everything is a 1, 2, 3, 4 read. There are going to be things where, and I think Tyler Buchner's capable. You mentioned this earlier about his mind for the game. He's capable of going past his second read. I think we've seen him do that in college. But the big thing is you don't want to have, if you're going to throw the ball 30 times, which I think is a reasonable number, right? 30 times is not a lot especially when you include there's going to be minimum 5 RPO attempts, right? I think that's fair to say. There are going to be, of those, let's just say there's 5 RPO attempts, 30 attempts overall. I would say of that next 25 throws, Ryan, I'd say close to half, maybe slightly less than half, are going to be plays where you basically have a 2-man read because you're running some sort of play action, right? Where it's we're going post to dig, something like that, where we have max pro. There's only maybe 2, 3 guys even in the route. One guy's just taking the top off the defense. Then there's going to be other plays where you're designing using your personnel, your motions and shifts to then isolate a route that we like, right, as an offensive staff. And so the reality is maybe 13 to 15 throws a game, if you're throwing 30 times, are going to be full field reads in this offense. I think that's certainly manageable. And I think Tyler's capable of effectively executing that. And I think that I would err on the side of, because I do think Tommy Rees is a smart coach, I would err on the side of more of those lower reads early on of the season to get Tyler rolling. Yeah, I think those things are going to be important. It just look, if you can find ways to get him comfortable, I think that's where you say, okay, you can use some of those reads. And then when he's got to read full field, you'll feel a lot better about kind of where you are. And I think those are the aspects. Again, this is a prediction, not giving you any intel. This is just my opinion. I think we will see more of that. We see all this stuff going on, Ryan. Motions. You're gonna shift your side across, and bring this guy on this, and then do all this stuff. When in reality, there's one read. I'm doing all this other stuff because we think we know what we're going to get coverage wise, and we're trying to isolate this. And if we don't get what we want coverage wise, then we're just throwing the check swing out to Chris Tyree, which is exactly what they did on the first play of the game against Oklahoma State. They thought they were going to have a downfield shot. Oklahoma State covered it up. So just threw a swing route to Chris Tyree and he ran for 20 yards. You know what I mean? There's going to be stuff like that too. And I think that's why when you talk about why do we like what Tommy Rees does schematically, it's stuff like that. It just wasn't always executed really well last year because of mainly the offensive line. But I think those are things that when you add a dynamic runner like Tyler Buchner, that's what you start getting excited about. And then maybe they don't have any great receivers, but again, what they do have? Guys can run. And Braden Lindsey doesn't have to have great technique and all these other things that people criticize him for to say, I'm going to motion you down and have you run. You're going to aim for 25 to 30 yards across the field, and you're going to outrun that guy. You know what? Braden can do that, right? And then if he adds the other parts to it, then obviously you're better off. But even for people who criticize Braden Lindsey, you should at least be able to admit that he can do that. Sure. And we saw Tommy do a good job of scheming that stuff for him last year at times. So, Ryan, that's kind of why you look at it. And there's none of those throws I'm thinking about. None of those throws, with the exception of that deep post, are throws that I have any concern about Tyler Buchner making because we've seen him make them. That's the reality of it.
And he can change the narrative really quick. I mean, it's one of those things where it's not that you necessarily think he can't do it. It's just you haven't seen it at this point, right? Like, that's the question. It's not a question because you say, oh, I don't know if he has the arm strength to make the throw, yada, yada, yada. It's literally only concern for you because you just literally have not seen him do it yet. So that is the big determiner. I agree. I think that I think we're going to see some points early on in the season where it's about making things easy and comfortable, kind of like you said, right? Like, I mean, that's why we're always talking about, like, hey, maybe you roll Tyler Buckner out and give him an easy read that way. Or maybe, hey, maybe you go and flex and it's just all hitches and Tyler throw to where you got the most cushion from a corner or a safety or whatever it is. So I think there's merit to getting a guy comfortable. And then there's also merit to, we got to let this guy loose a little bit. Right. And whenever he is able to get loose, he's got to make him pay, because the biggest sell to Tyler Buckner, because I think he can do a little bit of everything. Like, I think he can be that dink and dunker down the field and kill you on the short game, intermediate, do all that stuff. But the big thing for me, Brian, is that the biggest sell to Tyler Buckner, in my opinion, is that he can create explosive plays. He has that type of upside, and you need to make sure that he can also do that in the passing game. If he can, then the kid's a headache. The kid's a headache to deal with.
And that's going to be the fun stuff. He's going to be scrambling. You're going to come flying down. All of a sudden, he just stops and throws it over your head. It's like, oh, dang it. We thought we had him. And that's going to be what's fun to see. Now, can he limit the mistakes, right? What are the concerns about Tyler Buckner? What are the question marks you have going into the season? Number one, it's most obvious. Can he stay healthy? Right? That's understandably going to be the biggest question mark with Tyler Buckner. And we could sit here and nitpick, well, this is really what happened here, and he just had the one. The reality is he missed a game last year. He missed the blue gold game, and he missed his entire sophomore year than the injury. I'm not going to argue with someone who's concerned about him being able to stay healthy. I also think you couple that with his playing style, then I think that's obviously a concern. The one thing I would say to do is when you play Ohio State, when you play Clemson, when you play USC, everything's on the table. If you got to run Tyler Buckner 25 times to beat Ohio State, then you run Tyler Buckner 25 times to beat Ohio State. 100%. But you don't come back the next week against Marshall and do the same thing. You don't need that to beat Marshall. You don't need that to beat Cal. I mean, we're just being honest, right? Like, there's the whole, look, you respect all your opponents and any given Saturday. Okay, that's all true. But you also have to be smart and say, if you need Tyler Buckner to scramble around and run the ball 20 times to beat Marshall, you got way bigger problems than whether or not Tyler Buckner can or can't stay healthy, right?
100%.
So you got to be smart with it. That's where maybe you enhance some other parts of your game while still you don't not run them. It's just you be smart about it. That's obviously a part to this conversation as well, but he's got to be able to hold up and answer the bell each week. The second one is related to his lack of experience, and this was true of a question mark of Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud going into last year. It's true of every young quarterback. What will his level of consistency be? Will he be a guy that 1 week looks like the world beater 5-star upside kid that you and I think that he has, or will this be the week he looks like a redshirt freshman that hasn't really started a game in 3 years? Right? Like, that's the question. Like, how much does he go to one side of that, or is he kind of right down the middle? How quickly can he become a consistent quarterback, not just week to week, but then series to series, and then play to play? That's the other question mark. Just from a youth thing, he's got to show it. And then I think the third piece for me when it comes to Tyler Buckner, Ryan, is, I want to see how young players that are dynamic playmakers can make one or two big mistakes as first-year starters. One, it is this. It's you are too reckless and you turn the ball over a bunch. Two, you're afraid of turning the ball over, so you take away some of your playmaker ability. How quickly can Tyler Buckner find that sweet spot? That is going to be the big question mark for me. That's going to go a long way towards determining just how good he can be this year. And that's also partly why I think it was really smart for them to – I mean, look, they announced the decision, 8 days into fall camp? Yep. If we're being honest, the snaps were basically split up as Tyler Buckner is a starter from the minute camp started. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And now that he is the established starter, you're going to continue to see his snaps be increased to where he's going to get a lot of work in, which is why it was smart to make the decision now. And the team knows, he knows, and now it's time to get ready. And now you got a little less than 3 weeks to get ready for Ohio State, right? Or about 3 weeks to get ready for Ohio State.
We didn't even talk about that in the last episode, Brian, and it's a great point, is the fact that he hasn't played a ton, right? Like, he's the type of kid where I want to have live bullets, because honestly, I'm okay with him making a couple mistakes from here to there. I should expect it, because he's testing out what his limits are, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it, right? And that's a really complicated saying, I know, but it is something where Tyler Buckner is not going to know the throws that he can't make until he tries to make it, and he can't. Like, that's just the reality of it. He doesn't. It's like Trey Lance last year that came out of North Dakota State, right? I didn't think that Trey Lance was a guy that needed to sit back and just watch, although that's pretty much what San Francisco did. He's a player that needs to play. Tyler Buckner needs to play football. And I think that that's a great point that let's get the decision out of the way. You knew who the starting quarterback was. Let's give him all the first team reps because he literally needs to see different types of coverages, different defenses. He needs to work through his offense. He needs to see the game, and he needs live bullets at the end of the day. So I think that was a great point by you. It's just the fact that, like, let's all remember, he needs to play. He needs to play. He needs to play. Right. He needs to learn what he can do. He needs to learn what he can't do. And all this stuff right now, the timing of everything, I think is incredibly beneficial for him to get those live bullets.
This is going to sound weird, but if I don't hear about Tyler Buckner throwing some interceptions in fall camp, I'm going to get nervous. I am, because there's two options as to why that's true. One is he is playing at such a high level that he's going to go out and win the Heisman Trophy this year. I don't think that's the reason, right? The second reason is he's afraid to take shots. He's not like you made a great point, and I'm saying this in response to what you just said, Ryan. You said you don't know what you don't know until you realize you don't know it, right? And that is the thing, is like, you don't know if you can make this throw or not. And guess what is the perfect time to do it? Monday, August 15th. You know what I mean? To where when you make that mistake and, you know, the linebacker picks you off or the safety picks you off or whatever the case may be, you get in the film room, didn't cost you anything. You get in the film room, you say, okay, here's what happened on the throw. You shouldn't have made the throw. Or, hey, I like where your head's at, but you should have thrown it sooner, or you should have thrown it later, or whatever the case. You should have put more air on it. You should have zipped it, whatever the need may be. Hey, I like this cover two throw you tried to make there. You got picked off by the safety because you let it hang up a little too much. Get that throw out there with a little bit more zip and velocity. And then the next time he throws it on the flat line drive in the cover, and Cam Hart comes underneath it and picks it off. And that's how you learn, okay, here's the sweet spot for that throw. How did you get to that point? Because I got picked off twice doing it the wrong way each way. You know what I mean? And that's what you want to see in practice. And that was sort of my issue with the last two quarterbacks ago, is he just would not make mistakes in practice, because in team situations, he would just take the check down. And I'm okay with that to a degree, but it's like, hey, can you maybe just try to bang a dig route in practice? That'd be cool. Just give it a shot. See if it happens. See if it works for you. And I think those are the things that you want to hear, that he's making those mistakes. Now, if I guess the third reason would be he's not making picks because the defense stinks. And I think we both know that's not the reason. But I don't mind hearing that. I actually kind of want to see that, especially now. Like, I could understand him having a little bit of hesitancy to make those. And I don't know if he did or didn't. We saw one full practice and there was no pads on. I don't know if he is doing these things or not. I'm just theoretically. Now that he's been named the starter, you're not going to change your mind because you had a couple bad practices in a row. He's the starter. Now is like, okay, Tyler, you're the guy. We're showing faith in you. Now let her rip. If you make a mistake, we'll coach it up on the field. We'll get in the film room. We'll figure it out, and we'll move on to the next one. And we may realize, hey, this pass concept doesn't work. Tyler just can't do this. So then you move on to something else. And so I think those are the things you need to see. And it comes from, Ryan, as you mentioned, it comes from reps, getting those first team reps, the starter reps from a volume standpoint. I think it's very important. And then the final piece is, it's important too, because if you're in a quarterback battle, one day you're working with the twos, the next day you're working with the ones. That's all good early in fall camp. That's actually something I would always encourage coaches to do, even if you have a starter. Like if I'm Ryan Day, this is just my philosophy, and maybe they do this, maybe they don't. Maybe third or fourth day of practice, I'd say, hey, Kyle McCord, you're going to run with the ones during this team period. Why am I doing that? Am I challenging CJ Stroud? And am I trying to no, I'm trying to say, what if CJ has to come out? What if he sprains his ankle? What if, he gets called for targeting because he tackles the guy wrong on an interception? I mean, there's a million things that could happen. I need to know that Kyle McCord has reps with the first team offense, that he's thrown to Marvin Harrison, that he's handed off to Travion Henderson and knows where the level that he likes the ball and the timing with which Travion gets downhill, and he's communicated in the line, has heard a cadence with him as quarterback. Those things are all important early in fall camp. But now it's like, okay, now it's time to start getting ready to go beat Ohio State on September 3rd, and that's going to be the key. So I think the timing of it was really good. And the final piece to it too, Ryan, it shows me that Marcus Freeman and Tom Reese don't give a rip about playing mind games. They care about getting their team ready, right? And you and I, they're not going to beat Ohio State because they played this game of, who's our starting quarterback? Because Ohio State's going to prepare for Tyler Buckner anyway. You know what I mean? So I like the fact that they're just like, let's get it over with. Our players don't have to answer it anymore. It's out there. He's our guy. Let's roll. Let's go get ready to play. I thought that was a smart move by two young football coaches.
And we talked about it, Brian. I mean, to the timing of everything, like you said, there's some merit to waiting a little bit to get those reps and to kind of give a fair
make him earn it.
Competition.
Yeah, make him earn 100%.
It. Yeah. But I really do think that it was perfect timing for a lot of for many of the reasons you said. And then also, I don't like delaying things that are the inevitable, right? Like, that Tyler Buchner was the guy. We were talking about it before spring. We're like, it's a competition, but like, it's only a competition until Tyler finally, puts that last cherry on top, is like, yeah, this is my job, right? So let's not.
And Drew earned the right to at least be given a chance to go out there early on and beat Tyler out. I think Drew earned that.
100%. Yep. So it was one of those things where the writing was on the wall. Everyone understands their role in this football team. The team knows who the starter is. The team is comfortable with the starter and comfortable with the backup too. Because he hasn't had a ton of reps, but Drew Pines played some football obviously last year for Notre Dame. So I think it's a perfect situation. And going back to a point that you made before, I think having Drew Pine in this room is a big time thing, because Tommy Rees, you talk about having that backup and being able to fill in at times and do all that type of stuff. Who knows better than Tommy Rees backing up Everett Golson, right? At the year. Tommy Rees was an important player for that team that year. He came in a couple tight spots where he needed to play well to win a football game. And I think that's the same thing for me, is that Drew Pine gives you some insurance, I think, in that regard.
That is a fascinating point. And it really goes twofold, Ryan, because you have a quarterbacks coach who, within the last 12 years, has been in both of these kids' shoes. He's been the young quarterback thrust into the starting lineup, playing in big games. He knows what that pressure's like. He started 4 games as a freshman. I believe his first home start was against top 15 Utah in a game where Notre Dame was a huge underdog because they were 4-5. Then you go into a situation where you move on to your second season and he's a starter there. Then the roles were reversed. And in 2012, he was the backup that had to show the leadership because the starter was more of a playmaker, but not the most vocal guy in the world. It is really fascinating to think about that Tommy Rees has literally been in both of their shoes right now and can speak from experience at Notre Dame of what both of these kids are going through. I never really thought about that, but that is a fascinating point, Ryan. A fascinating point.
You said at the beginning of the show, Brian, that Coach Rees made it a point to talk about how important Drew Pine was to this football team. And I think it's honestly because he's been there. Like, he's seen the game from that perspective. Like, that is a very unique perspective.
Yeah, the more talented, dynamic, younger player that I can't do the things he can do. I get it.
Sure.
I don't like it, but I get it.
But I don't think anybody would sit here and say that Tommy Rees wasn't an important player during that 2012 season. Like, he had his role every single day, and when he was called upon in games, and he did a lot for the program that year. And who knows? Drew Pine is probably going to be counted upon for a big moment, maybe during the season, but at worst, that every day he's going to come to practice, he's going to challenge, he's going to have that energy, and he's going to be a really good teammate. Those things about Drew Pine.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I love that point, Ryan. I love that point. Drew Pine, to me, too, I think this is going to help him. And this may sound strange, but I feel like big part of the problem that Drew had in the spring is he was pushing. He was forcing too much. He was trying to keep up with Tyler. Like, Tyler made this play. I got to go try to fit this ball into triple coverage. And it was hurting him. He wasn't making the plays he needed to make. I kind of feel like if Drew responds to this the way that I think he's going to respond to it, which is I don't expect him to like it. And honestly, I hope he doesn't like it. I hope that Drew Pine's like, no, I'm cool. I'm cool being a backup. It's all good. I would think less of him. I don't think that's his mentality. But I think he understands it and he accepts it, right? There's a difference between liking something and accepting something, right? And I think Drew understands that. He comes from he has a very strong family background where he's going to get good support for this from home, to where it's going to be, hey, man, look, I know you don't like it. I get it. But you know what? Go out there and this is your role and own it and do the best that you can. That's the advice I got from my dad when I got replaced by a younger player. I was a starter. I didn't feel it was fair. I didn't think it was right. my dad thought it was wrong, but his advice was also, but you still got to be there for your teammates. You still got to go out there and do what you got to do and be a good teammate and embrace that role. And, and that's the reality of it. So, I think that's kind of where it needs to be. That's where this process needs to move for Drew, because as you said, Notre Dame is going to need Drew Pine this year. And when people hear that, they automatically think, Ryan, that it's about he's going to have to step in and play like Tommy did in 2011. That may not be true. But even if Drew Pine doesn't take a meaningful snap this entire season, Notre Dame is going to need Drew Pine for the reasons
100%.
we talked about at the beginning. They need him locked in mentally. He can still challenge Tyler. It's just different now. Challenge him in the film room. Challenge him on the field. Hey, man, let's go, dude. Did you not see that back? You got to do that, man. We need you to make that throw. And that's if they do have the relationship we're told that they have, okay, then that's something I think Tyler can embrace that role. And I hope that he does Drew embraces that role, because that's where he can have a really big impact this year without throwing a single meaningful snap. And if you talk to people that were around the team in 2012, they'll tell you that's what Tommy did with Everett. He wasn't just waiting on Everett to get hurt. Tommy had a role because he then said, hey, I don't like it, but Everett's the guy. I kind of put myself in this situation a little bit in the offseason. Tommy, that didn't happen with Drew. But hey, the team needs me to be a sort of a not a mentor to Everett. I don't think Drew Pine needs to be a mentor to Tyler Buchner. He doesn't have the experience to be that kind of player. But to be that kind of guy that, hey, you and I are friends, I can speak this truth to you. You got to stop making that mistake. Or did you not see that? Or you're talking him through in the film room and then using his IQ to then help make Tyler Buchner better. That's the other way that I think Drew Pine can help this football team that no one's going to talk about if he doesn't step on the field and make plays. But I promise you, we will start hearing those stories after the season or at the end of the season. If it's true, if Tyler Buchner stays healthy all year and has that kind of year, you're going to start hearing stuff from behind the scenes about the role that Drew Pine has. And it'll sound like it's a fluffy story to just throw love at Drew Pine, but I promise you it'll be a real thing, and it'll be something that helps this football team be better. That's why I say I don't care if Drew Pine takes a meaningful snap all season. And honestly, I kind of hope he doesn't, because it's the reasons why are bad. Tyler Buchner gets hurt or sick, or Tyler Buchner's not playing well. Both are bad. So This is going to sound bad. As much as I love Drew Pine, I hope he doesn't take a meaningful snap all year. But even if he doesn't, I promise you, Drew Pine's going to have a big impact on this football team because of all the other stuff he brings to the table and the fact that he can find that role where he's going to be sort of the guy that pushes Tyler in more ways than just, hey, I had a great practice. You better step up or I'm coming for your job. Look, he's the starter, right? That's just the reality. I don't care if Drew Pine goes out there and goes 20 for 20 in the next scrimmage, he's not starting. That's not the pushing we're talking about. Now, it kind of does, right? Because Tyler's like, you can't slack off just because you're the starter now, right? But it's the other part of it. And I think that's going to have a big part of what they're doing.
Well, one thing I loved about Tommy was I'm not surprised that he took the role that he was given and just kind of kept competing at a high level, because one thing about Tommy Rees is he's a very competitive person. I see that easily.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the same vibes, not the same personality, but similarly to Drew Pine, where he has some personality to him, right? Like I could tell that kid really is a competitive young man. And I don't think that he's going to stop competing just because he's named the backup and not the starter. So I think I agree. Every single day, I expect him to push Tyler to his limits, because I just think that's personality-wise. I think that's who Drew Pine is, and I think that is huge for this team overall.
Yep, absolutely. Here's the final piece to this, Ryan, that I think is fascinating. Now, I said all that about the meaningful snaps and all that kind of stuff, but I do think Notre Dame has to think hard about how they're going to handle reps this season. I think you and I both agree we don't want to see a two-quarterback system. I don't want to see – we said this. If Drew starts, then I want to see a two-quarterback system, because if Drew Pine is your starting quarterback and Tyler Buchner's healthy and he's not your red zone quarterback, you're not doing it right, in my opinion, right? Like just kind of, hyperbolic to prove a point. When Tyler's your starter, there isn't another role for Drew Pine, in my opinion. So what I want to see is, or consider is, because here's the deal. Drew's a junior and he's smart and all that. He's only played in 2 games, like any meaningful snaps in 2 games. That's it. Tommy started 4 games as a freshman and played almost all the 2011 season as a starter. And so, to me, I want to see a situation where, when you look at Drew and you say, okay, this kid, it's a weird dynamic, and I'm trying to figure out how to say it right. Tyler needs work. You said that earlier, but you know who else needs reps? Drew, because he's in a situation where he's only played meaningful snaps in 2 games, Ryan. And so, do you get in a situation where you don't do the 2 quarterback system, but maybe you go to your backup in some games a little earlier than you normally would? So let's say you're up 31-7 in the 3rd quarter against Marshall. Maybe you take Tyler out before you take the rest of the first team offense out to get Drew some extra work. That's going to be a really interesting dynamic too. Again, it's not against Ohio State, I hope it's against Ohio State, because if they're winning 31-7 in the 3rd quarter, no, you know what? Even if it's 31-7 in the 3rd quarter with that offense, nope, we're still scoring because that team can score quick. But in some of these games, Ryan, I am interested to see how they handle, okay, how do we also get Drew some much needed reps that in some of those situations, knowing that Tyler also needs those game reps. It's going to be a really interesting dynamic, and I hope we find the answer out to that early, the first 2 home games, if I'm being honest with you.
It's a fascinating thing because it's like you said, Brian, it's not like you have a proven commodity, a quarterback that just doesn't need those reps, right? Like, you only need him to have the valuable reps during the big games. Like, he also needs to play. So it's trying to balance those things out to make two players happy that deserve an opportunity, if we're being completely honest, like they are. And you need to keep Drew Pine also ready just in case. Like, you need to have those reps involved. So it is going to be fascinating. I'll be at the first home game against Marshall. I'm hoping that I'll see Drew Pine during that game a little bit. I'm hoping that I don't see Tyler Buchner take every single snap against Marshall.
That'd be a bad sign.
That would be a very bad sign if it took one quarterback to beat the Thunder. It would be not a great sign. So you have to pick your spots a little bit with it. I think that you have to be a little creative at points with it, but I genuinely believe that both quarterbacks need to play for different reasons. Like, we need Tyler Buchner to play because he needs to see the game and he's inexperienced and he's a starting quarterback. You also need Drew Pine to play because he is your main backup, and he's a guy that is literally one snap away, something bad happening, from being the guy, right? So both these guys are both inexperienced for their roles, different roles, but they both need to play because they need to maximize their opportunity, because we just talked this whole time about Tyler Buchner's most important player on this team, but Drew Pine is also very important. He's not, there's not it's not like, oh, he's the backup, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, no, Drew Pine's a very important football player. We've seen this role be important in the past for Notre Dame. So they both need reps. It's going to be interesting to see how they balance that out.
Because we talked about this the other day, right? So they've had 12 seasons, of Brian Kelly. 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. So each of Brian Kelly's first, 8 or 9 seasons, a second quarterback was needed at some point. Whether it was now in a lot of those years, you had 10, 11, 12, 14, 15. So in all but the 2013 season, you had 2 quarterbacks start a game. 13, I don't believe you had a second quarterback start. That was the year Everett was suspended. But you did but Tommy did get knocked out of the USC game, if you remember, and they had to bring in Andrew Hendricks off the bench. So even though he didn't start a game, you needed him to come in and hold on to a lead. So like you said, it's history shows that you kind of need that. It's funny, the Ian Book, other than missing the Florida State game his first year as a starter, was a pretty durable quarterback. I mean, give him credit. He was a pretty durable quarterback and played through some injuries and some things like that. Last year, obviously, Jack Cohn started every game, but needed to be, he got hurt against Wisconsin and then poor performance. So Drew Pine came in last year twice for different reasons. One injury, one performance related. And hopefully you don't get into that this year, but if it does, you want to make sure that Drew is ready to play. So, final question that I have for you, Ryan, and this is kind of impromptu. I didn't tell you that we're going to discuss this, but it just kind of popped in my head with the quarterback position. Statistically, what is a kind of season that if I were to tell you, Ryan, I have looked into the future and I only had a very brief glimpse, and all I know is that Notre Dame was in the playoff. I don't know what happened in the playoff. I don't know. I couldn't see stats. Notre Dame's in the playoff. What do you think Tyler Buchner's numbers need to look like? Not predicting what they will be, but what do they need to look like for him to be a quarterback that can lead Notre Dame to the college football playoff?
For the college football playoff, I think that from a passing perspective, we need to look around. I think 3,000 yards is the number, but I think that's give or take 200, right? Like you can sell me on 2,800 yards being enough. You can sell me on 3,200 being a necessity. Like those are the things where I just kind of see 3,000 as a number and that we can take one way or the other. Rushing yards, I think he needs to be a valuable member of this offense. So I think it's 500 to 700 yards, somewhere in that ballpark. You need to be a substantial part of this rushing attack, in my opinion. You don't need to be the number one rusher on the team, but you need to have your impact felt. So 3,000 yards, give or take 100 to 200 here and there. Rushing, I need 500 to 700 yards. Touchdowns, I need at least 35 total touchdowns. That's the number for me. If you have 35 or more total touchdowns, I think you're in a good spot as far as being the main catalyst for a successful offense.
So for me, and again, we're talking regular season here. To me, I'm comfortable with your 3,000 yard number, although I will say I've kind of been around 3,500 yards is kind of where you need to be. I would say 3,500 to 3,700 is where he needs to be in the regular season of combined yards.
Yep.
That's 300, kind of 3,000 in the regular season gets him a little under 260 per game, which if Tyler Buchner's throwing for over 250 a game and also dropping at least 500 yards rushing on the season, which I think I could see him going higher there. Like I really could. But if he's doing that, and I think you're correct. I think 35 touchdowns. I would even argue that maybe there's a case for 40 needs to be the number because of how many he can run in. I think is really get you where you want to be. That would make this offense number one. He'd have to be healthy to get there because like you talk about like 260 yards isn't a ton. There's going to be games he throws for 350, and then there's going to be games he throws for 175 because they just maul a team and he doesn't throw a pass beyond the 10-minute mark of the second quarter really, other than some RPOs. And so I think I think those are comfortable numbers I'm comfortable with. I would say to make me feel really good about him being a playoff team, I think probably closer to 37 to 3,800 is if you were to tell me Tyler Buchner's going to have 3,800 yards of total offense this year and about 40 touchdowns, I'd say, boy, that Notre Dame offense is going to be hard to beat. I really would. And again, CJ, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud had over 4,500 yards. I think Bryce had about 4,800 yards last year. CJ was around 4,500 yards last year. Different offenses, very different offenses. So I think for Notre Dame and what they do, you get around that 3,800 yard mark, Ryan. That's going to be a pretty good day. Pretty 100%. Good day.
100%.
So, Ryan, that's going to wrap up our quarterback breakdown. I think it's a fascinating thing, and I think we both agree that we hope that Notre Dame doesn't get in a situation where they need to go to the third quarterback. And that's not a knock on Steve Angeli. You just never want to be in a situation where you've had that many injuries that you got to go to your third quarterback. So the focus here, obviously, as we kind of look at the season and the expectations, it really does come down to Tyler Buchner and Drew Pine. So that's going to wrap up our quarterback breakdown. Don't go anywhere because we do have a mailbag coming up. But before we move to the mailbag, we do ask that you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Ryan, we are over 1,000 subscribers on our new CFB Nation channel. Sean and I are going to start populating that. We have actually put some videos on there. We have our ACC, our Big Ten, or we actually did our Big Ten predictions. We did our SEC predictions. We've got a couple other videos on there. Check those out. But you should start seeing some videos and podcast drop. So if you have not subscribed to the CFB Nation podcast, please do that. It is the podcast. There's two, actually. There's some old podcast that they haven't gotten rid of that's like got a gray, yellow and black background. That's not it. Ours is the cool red, white, and blue one, right? You'll see that, and we're going to start dropping some shows this week. So you're definitely going to want to make sure that you subscribe to that on We definitely have it on Apple Podcasts right now and on Spotify, and we should be getting it out here to more distributors here very, very soon. So definitely check those out, and if you haven't done so, subscribe to it on YouTube. So Ryan, that's gonna, like I said, that's the quarterback battle. Hit that like button, subscribe, notification, and share. And of course, we'll be back tonight, 6 p.m. Sean Stiers and Vince D'Addario will be talking on IB Nation Sports Chat tonight. So definitely check that out as well. So Ryan, let's go mailbag time. We did have some questions there. Now that we're in mailbag time, you can have a conversation. You can ask us about whatever you want. Some of the stuff we'll be comfortable talking about, some we won't. But let's get into the mailbag, Ryan. We have a question here from BRB RKRKR1. Brian, do you recall Jeff Allman from the 1988 National Championship team, 6 DN? So thought of him when the talk of the size of Riley Mills, both from Chicagoland. Allman played with a great ferocity. Rest in peace to Jeff Allman. Obviously, he passed away several years ago. You know, I kind of get it, but the thing about Jeff Allman, I do vaguely remember him a little bit. Ryan, you might remember him from the pros. He played in the NFL for a while, but it was a long time ago. He was really long, but Riley, the thing about Riley is I see the length comparison, but Riley's huge. Huge. I mean, he's a big kid. I mean, Jeff Allman was like 250, I think, or so. Riley Mills was 290 plus pounds. So, massive. Yeah.
The name, I know it's not a Notre Dame comp, but I think the name I threw out there before was Grant Windstrom, like when he played at Nebraska. Like Grant Windstrom was just a massive, massive dude. And I'll be completely honest, this is super hyperbolic, but one day before the show, we were watching the practice highlights, Brian, remember? And I said, like, why does he look like JJ Watt right there? Like, that's insane, man. Like, he's rocking the 99. He's long, huge, like just a massive young man. So, yeah.
And they need him to step up this year. I mean, he's a very important piece to this whole thing. They need him to be healthy. They need to play well. They need to be productive. I mean, they're going to really need him. But I'll tell you what, one thing, it was interesting. I was on the Horn this morning. It's a show down in Austin, Texas. They're doing their preseason preview, and I went on there again and talking about Notre Dame, and they were talking about, you know, Notre Dame's lack of size on the defensive line. Are they big enough? And I'm like, you know, they are at end. And I was sitting there thinking about this, like, you know, Notre Dame, I got to do the math here, but Notre Dame might actually average more weight in the starting defensive ends than they do at the starting defensive tackles. When you consider, so I'm actually going to kind of go down here and actually do that, because I think they have Jacob Lacey's, Howard Cross's weight a little bit puffed up on the roster, but hey, it's all good. But they have Howard Cross at 276 and Jason Adamiola at 285. So I'm going to do the math here real quick as we're talking. But the reality is with this, Ryan, is these two guys, Riley Mills and Isaiah Foskey. One of the articles I'm going to write here soon is Notre Dame's defensive line Notre Dame's defense has to get better against the run. They've been good against the run, but they've always been pretty inconsistent. Last year in the second half of the year, Marcus Freeman's run defense outside of scrambles against North Carolina was dominant. But they were really, first 2 weeks, they were really, really sketchy. They need to get better against the run. And honestly, I think these two kids are a big part of it. The ends are going to have to be dominant players, because that's where the size, the power, and the strength is. I mean, they have to be dominant players. And if they can be that, I think it takes a lot of pressure off of the defensive tackles. And by the way, the defensive tackles are 4 pounds heavier than the defensive ends on weight. Now, that's not average, that's total. The two tackles are 561 pounds. The two ends are 557 combined pounds. But the ends are going to, best way to take pressure off of the defensive tackles is to dominate the edge and funnel everything back inside if that's what you're doing. So either force it back inside or spill it outside, whatever you want to do, but be dominant with it and force the running backs to declare early. I think defensive ends can have a big, big play in that. And Riley Mills, a big end that's not dominant against the run is a problem for your defense. And that the pass rush is going to be great, but that's where I really need to see Riley Mills, especially against Ohio State, really perform, is as a stout edge defender against the run.
Brian, you want a great talking point? When's the last time Notre Dame's smallest defensive end was 6'5", 260 plus pounds with 35-inch arms?
I know, right?
Like, it's insane, man. It's insane to think about.
Yeah.
In a lot of defenses, if you're playing a weak side and a strong side defensive end, Isaiah Foskey would be the strong side defensive end from a size perspective, but you have a 6'5", 293 kid on the other side of him, which is just ridiculous to think about, man. Like, that is just crazy, crazy size.
Yeah, and he's not fat. He's just huge. I mean, he's just massive. A big kid.
Broad shoulders, no bad, like he's just a big guy. Like he looks like he was farming in Iowa somewhere. Like, that's what he looks like, man. Like he looks like he just was throwing hay bales all over the place.
Well, that's why I think is the Nebraska comparison really makes a lot of sense, because they just had this big kids. I mean, they just had these like just kind of walk through the door, like big necks, big broad shoulders, just really filled out, and that's just kind of what they brought to the table. And obviously that's kind of where Notre Dame is they need him to be that kind of guy, and they need him to play like he looks. That's the big thing. I think he will. I'm very high on him this season, and I've been high on him for the last couple of years. Everybody knows that, but I think he's a very important piece of this whole thing. There's no doubt. I had a question. And some of these questions, Ryan, we held over, they are related to the quarterback, so we will talk about those as well. There's some really good questions here, and keep them coming, because we'll obviously answer some more as we kind of get close to this conversation. So, John A1 asks, how does Buckner's arm strength compare to Jack Cohn's? Did we even see Jack's arm strength due to protection issues? I think answer the latter part, if you could, Ryan. Answer the latter part first, and then the comparison.
Yeah, I think, John, it did limit the ability to see the full arsenal of Jack's arm strength. Like, I remember seeing him at the East-West Shrine game, and I felt like he looked like a completely different player, because he was able to just kind of settle and really have better pockets and hit some tighter window throws and hit some throws outside the numbers and do all that type of stuff. So I do think that the protection did limit him to a degree. I would 100% agree with that. I still think that Tyler Buckner has a stronger arm than Jack. I think Jack's ball placement is more consistent right now than Tyler, but if we're just talking about pure arm strength, I would take Tyler. And especially, I think Tyler's much also better at using those different arm angles and kind of changing his platform a little bit. Jack is a very consistent thrower of the football. I feel like every throw just looks super on point. Like Brian talked about teach tape. If you want to teach tape, you would show him Jack Cohn, because every release is the same. Everything looks solid in that regard. Tyler is much more of a freelancer at times from an arm angle perspective, but I do think he has more raw arm strength than Jack Cohn does.
I would agree with that. I think that Jack also had to muscle up on some throws that I think Tyler kind of makes somewhat naturally.
Yes,
I do. And I think, I would agree with that. And I think when you do combine the speed of Jack didn't have a long delivery. He just had longer delivery. How about that compared to Tyler? That factors in arm strength, because if your arm is slightly better than mine, but I'm getting the ball out a second and a half faster than yours, guess what? My throw is going to get there faster, right? And that's kind of the reality of it. So I would agree with you there. And we did see Jack's arm strength at times last year. I think especially second half of the year. We got to see him stretch the field. I mean, we got to see his arm strength and at times lack of against Oklahoma State. We got to see it against Stanford. We got to see it against Georgia Tech. We got to see it against North Carolina at times. I mean, so we got to see it. We got to see a little bit against Florida State. We just didn't see it as much as we had needed to in the big games because of the protection issues. But we got to see it at times. There's no doubt.
Yep.
Tom Creevy asked us, he wanted this for the mailbag, but where do we go now that Ronan is going to Clemson? So we had something on the board about this yesterday, Ryan. So premium members kind of know where this is going. We dropped an intel piece last night on this. We talked about what happened with Ronan. So if you're sure, like, how did Ronan end up at Clemson? We had a long intel piece on that yesterday. Obviously, Ronan committed there yesterday, Ryan, but you talked about it in the mailbag today, so we definitely have some stuff out there. Let's talk about it now in the show, Ryan, is where does Notre Dame go now? I mean, there's two targets, but there's one clearly that Notre Dame is focusing on right now.
Yeah, well, so both out of the state of California. One is Tayshawn Lyons. The other one is Malachi Riley. Tayshawn Lyons is the one that received his offer pretty recently. That is the target right now for Notre Dame. We have in Brian's intel piece that he dropped on the board, he is expected, to take a game visit to Notre Dame this year against California. Should be the game that
that's what they're most working on for now.
Working on, not a finalized thing, but that is what the aiming is for the scheduled visit. I
from everything we have been told and everything we've heard, staff likes Tayshaun. I like his film a ton too. He's a longer kid, 6'2", but he's got some length, only 170 pounds, but over 30 yards a catch last year. I think he's got a really appealing combination of athleticism and body type where I think that he can hold a substantial amount of weight. So in this class where he would be the 5th wide receiver, in theory, if they're able to land him, I think he is a really nice developmental wide receiver for a part of the class.
I would have loved to have had a kid like him as the number 2 last year's class, just because but I think I was talking with a couple people yesterday about this. I was like, look, there's some projection to Tayshaun Lyons, right? That's why he, to me, I wouldn't rank him as a top 100 receiver, right? Like I wouldn't go there because, like you said, sizes, he's really skinny. His game is not overly refined right now. He's just really explosive on the field in 2 ways. He can stretch the field, but then also he does some stuff on film after the catch. His numbers are nuts. He has 16, according to his stats last year on Max Preps, he had 16 touchdown catches last year, which is really impressive. But when you dive into the total numbers, he had 28 receptions on the year, Ryan. So that means he caught the ball 28 times and scored a touchdown on 16 of them. And if you go watch his film, a lot of those touchdowns, he was doing all the work. And he had over 900 yards receiving on just 28 catches. This is a big play kid, but he's a projectable kid. He's a lower floor, higher ceiling guy that and the concern with the kids like that is the greater gap there is between your floor and your ceiling, the greater their room there is that you don't pan out, right? To some degree. But if this is your 5th receiver in a class, if they get him, again, there's a long time to go. They got to get him on camp. He has not visited campus yet. Things are going well now, but let's see how they go over the next month. But if you're able to add a kid like him or even Malachi Riley, who's a good player, I thought you nailed the explanation of Malachi Riley in your mailbag today. You said he's a good football player. But there's just nothing great about him. He's just a good football player. That's fine. I'm cool. What I like about this staff is that they're all on almost every instance they have erred on the side of the upside, and I like that. And they're doing that here. Like Malachi Riley is a more certain player, in my opinion. Tayshaun Lyons is the higher upside guy. And I like that they're taking that flyer on the upside guy, because if he hits, you've got an explosive playmaker. And that complements what you have. Taller kid, speedy kid, can do things after the catch. He's got a little bit of Dylan Edwards in him as far as after the catch. He's got a little bit of Braylon James in him as far as stretching the field. His body is a little bit height-wise, is a little closer to Rico. He's a really interesting kid. And, you get a kid like that as your 5th receiver, you're doing pretty good at wide receiver in recruiting. There's no doubt about it.
A stat that I found, well, I guess I kind of did the math on it, though, but he had 70% of the team's receiving yardage last year on only 28 catches.
Right.
Just think about that for a second. Like, that doesn't make any sense, man. Like, the team didn't throw the ball a ton, but still, you had 70% of the total receiving yards on the team, and you only had 28 receptions. If that doesn't say big play threat, I don't know what else would say. I mean, what was it, 31 yards a catch, whatever it was?
It's like 32, 32.4, I think is what it was, which is nuts.
It's gross, man. It's gross. Yeah. 16 touchdowns on 28 catches. That's Yep.
Absolutely nuts.
Decent percentage there.
Now, again, in the past, a kid like this would have been your 2nd or 3rd receiver. And that's where I would have complained. Like, look, you can't have a kid with this kind of gap between floor and ceiling as your number 2, number 3 receiver. But I love kids like this as your number 5. And this is what I like about it is, and here's the other thing too that I like about the staff. They have been talking to Tayshaun Lyons for a while. Like, I think sometimes people kind of think that, so the backs are Ronan Hannafin. I won't get into it. You have to look at the board. But Notre Dame's known for over a week that Ronan was definitely going somewhere else. And they've been concerned about it for a little while. But even when they thought they were going to get Ronan, they were still talking to other guys just in case, right? And so they have been building this relationship with Tayshaun Lyons for a little bit now. Not like super long, but a little bit now. So when the offer came, it wasn't like – because remember with Josh Manning, they just kind of offered him. They'd never really talked to him before. This is different. They're handling this one really well in that – and in their defense, they didn't really know about him until they got on the road. That's why they handled it that way. But with Tayshaun, they knew about him. They've been recruiting him for a little bit. So when the offer came, it was a lot cleaner to say, okay, the interest had already been piqued. Then the offer came with a little bit more meaning.
Right.
That is kind of where we're at with that. So that's why I think they've been able to kind of make a move with him a little bit faster than you otherwise would think for a kid that they just offered. Same thing with Dylan Edwards. Part of the reason things worked out so quickly with Notre Dame and Dylan Edwards is he already had an established relationship with Dylan McCullough, much like the relationship that Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse had with Chancey Stuckey.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that are helping Notre Dame in this instance. So that's where we're at for that. 99 props became one. Is Tyler Buchner or is Notre Dame going to use his legs to set up the pass, or the pass to set up the run with Tyler Buchner, or is that the thought or is that thought well intentioned but off target on how Tyler Buchner's multifaceted talent is properly used?
I think the answer to the first question is both yes. I mean, there's going to be games where setting up the run to start out the game is going to be paramount for the pace of the game. I think of Ohio State, for instance. So there's going to be other games where like, hey, let's open up with the pass a little bit and we're going to ease the run and set up the run that way. I don't think there's one way that's the correct way to do it. I think that this is the feel side to the game from a coaching perspective, right? Like you go into a game and you just kind of have a general understanding of like, hey, let's start out this way. Let's start out that way. And then you ease into it. The great thing, 99 Problems, in my opinion, is that Tyler Buchner has both sides of the coin. So you can choose. I mean, it really is kind of dictating pace at that point. You can really work either side of it. You don't have to just say like, hey, we need to run to set up the pass consistently. You can open up the passing game at times and then turn back into the run game. So I think that you can go either way in that department. And I think that's the type of athlete that Tyler Buchner is, that he gives you that possibility offensively.
I just need to make a note. I just got a quick message. I need to let some of our readers know, listeners know that it is okay to occasionally not catch the show live and go back and listen to it later, especially if your wife or your child have needs. So maybe if like some of our readers, like, I don't know, Jacob Hayden, like sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, I'll catch this later. I need to go handle some business, but I really appreciate the message. It was actually a really cool message I just got. Just got a chance to see a picture of Jacob's daughter too. She's or his, yes, I believe so. I believe that's his daughter. I think that I read that correctly. But their baby is absolutely adorable. So we appreciate all your support so much. I had a lady one time that said, "You're going to end my marriage." I said, "What?" She said, "All my husband does is listen to your show." She was saying it in good fun, but we certainly appreciate that. And we're trying to get everybody involved, all the family involved in our show. So absolutely. But we appreciate that very, very, very much. And Jacob, we definitely appreciate your support as well.
Don't miss class again, Jacob.
Yeah.
Only one miss.
Hulk Strongest. Is that over top throw you're talking about, the Golson, the one Golson threw in the Oklahoma game? Yeah. I mean, that's an example of it, right? That was more of an ISO throw, Ryan, where, it's a little bit different, but yeah, same philosophy. Can you throw the ball over the top of the defense? And the thing about that throw too, Ryan, is that wasn't a quick hit your drop and throw. That was a play action pass wherever it stretched it and then sank and then launched it downfield. I don't know if Tyler has the arm strength to make that specific throw, but from the same family, right? I mean, I think, would you agree, Ryan, that that's kind of the throw that we're talking about that he needs to be able to make? I think another throw is just that deep seam route, being able to throw that ball over the top as well. But yeah, I think Hulk, I think that's exactly the kind of throw we're talking about. Here's an interesting question, Ryan. We're from Ryan Loftus. I'll get some super chats down here we'll get to next. But from Ryan Loftus, he said, Tim Tebow. There was a conversation going on about Tim Tebow, comparing Tyler Buchner to Tebow. Yeah. And I saw this wasn't a question so much as a comment. I'm asking the question. In relation to Ryan's comment, Ryan said that Tim Tebow is probably the best quarterback of the last 25 years in college. He was a gamer. What are your thoughts on that comment? Because I've heard this mentioned before, and I have some thoughts on it, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
From a full resume, I could accept it. I mean, I'm trying to think of a couple guys that I think would be in the conversation. I mean, Trevor Lawrence would probably be one, right? It's most dynamic quarterback probably in the last 25 years that I've seen, at least, is probably Lamar Jackson. If I'm just thinking of it like that, like that kid was just, that's the kid that I don't want to face the most if I'm a defensive coordinator, but I'd probably go with Tebow. I mean, he national championship winner, Heisman Trophy winner, 3 dynamic seasons as the starter, was even a valuable member of his freshman year behind Chris Leak. So like, I would accept that premise, Ryan, honestly.
I wouldn't say he's the best. I
Who would you
think
say
that
is the best?
well, I mean, I think if we're going to talk about a whole career, right? I think there's been quarterbacks I think have been better. I think that, as you kind of look back at different guys, I wouldn't put Cam Newton over him because Cam played 1 year, right? And Tim Tebow beat out Cam Newton.
Same
But I
thing
think,
with Joe Burrow.
I think Lamar's an option, right?
Mhm.
I think Joe Burrow's 1 year was so good, he at least has to be in the conversation. I think Trevor Lawrence should be in this conversation. I mean, when you look at Tim Tebow's career, he has 2 championships, but only one of them was as the starter. I mean, he was the backup quarterback on the first championship team in 06. That was Chris Leak's team. He played on great teams, and Tim Tebow was a great player in a winner. There's no Tim Tebow hate here, but I kind of feel like the Vince Young, I thought was to me. And here's where I say that Tebow was a great winner and a great player, but he also played on loaded teams. I kind of feel like you take Vince Young off that 05 Texas team and they're 9-3. It's just kind of how I feel about it. They had some really good players. I mean, Michael Huff and some, but Vince Young made that team, in my opinion. He made them a championship team. I think Tim Tebow was that way too, but not to the degree that Vince Young was. You know what I mean? I think so much of this goes down to championships, right, Ryan? And that's what people look at. Always a winner. Sure. Well, yeah, it's easier to win when you're playing on those loaded Florida teams. You know who else won a national title there? Chris Leak. Chris Leak won a national title with that on those Florida teams, right? I'm not no disrespect to Chris Leak, but
now, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
But it's just, to me, it's just like one of those things where, like somebody just said, I don't think 08 Florida is a championship team without Tim Tebow. They weren't a championship team because of Tebow. Their offense couldn't score on Oklahoma. They won that game because of their defense. Their defense stopped up to that point in time was the most prolific offense in the history of college football. Held them to like 21 points, right? I mean, they played that version of LSU and couldn't stop them. That's why they wasn't the final like 24-20, something like that, 24-21.
I don't remember
that defense did a phenomenal job in that game. And again, I'm not taking anything away from Tim Tebow. I just think sometimes he gets elevated a little bit higher than I think he should, just because of the hype around him from them. And that's the only thing I ever hated about Tim Tebow. It's just a nonstop drumbeat of him being shoved down our throat in every like I could be watching the game with 2 Big Ten teams and they're talking about Tim Tebow. It's just like, okay, enough. So he was a great player. He was a winner. He's in the conversation of the greatest of the last 25 years. But I'm throwing Matt Leinart in that conversation. I'm throwing Carson Palmer in that conversation. You know what I mean? Like there's other guys, not so much Carson Palmer because he was more like great at the end. But how are we not having Matt Leinart in this conversation? The knock on him is he had great players around him.
Great players,
well, exactly. Yeah. But why do we always say that about him? But we don't say the same thing about Tim Tebow. In one of his teams, he had Aaron Hernandez, Percy Harvin. Look at all the guys he had on defense of those teams. You know what I mean? Like he was playing on some loaded teams too. Why does it kind of get dismissed for Matt Leinart? They say, look, on that 4th and 9 play against Notre Dame, the dude that made that play was Matt Leinart. I mean, yeah, Dwayne Jarrett caught it, but it was one of the best balls I've ever seen in a clutch moment that if he doesn't make that throw, they don't win the game. Right. And he won 2 titles. Matt Leinart won 2 titles as a starter in college. So that's kind of where I come from about it is I just don't think it's a no-brainer. He's that guy. I think there needs to be a conversation. And like I wouldn't put Brady Quinn in it because Brady had 2 not very good years. So I mean it needs to be like held to a high standard. Sure. But I just don't think it's a lock that Tebow's that guy. Tebow played on great teams and he was the leader they needed to kind of get over the top, but they still would have been really good without him. And that's just, that's kind of why I don't quite put him to that level. Speaking of quarterbacks, here's one from Archer 452. Who are the top 10 quarterbacks in college football this year? Most seem to think Young, Stroud, Williams are the top 3 in some order. Who are the next 7? Well, our top 10, we actually did this, Archer, and we do not have Caleb Williams number 3. We had Caleb Williams 5. So Ryan, you and I did a top 10 at Irish Breakdown. And we disagreed on who was 1 and 2.
Yep.
And so we took a staff vote, and ended up being we put CJ Stroud number 1, Bryce Young number 2. I had CJ 1, you had Bryce 2, which it was kind of like neither of us wanted to argue with the other one because we think they're both great quarterbacks. We just kind of, here's who we have. Then our number 3 was actually Hendon Hooker. And we both agreed on that. He's an excellent, excellent player. Number 4 for us was Devin Leary. And then Caleb Williams was our number 5.
Yep.
So we didn't quite have that same order. And then 6 through 10 was more of a composite because we had some guys higher and lower, So what we did was we took our 2 votes. We both did our rankings 1 to 15 and then sort of averaged where guys are. And that's how we got our IB top 10. We had Tyler Van Dyke 6. We had Jake Hayner from Fresno State 7. We had Phil Dracovic from BC 8. We had Brennan Armstrong from Virginia 9. And then Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina 10. And then just to finish up our top 15 total, because we did 15, we had Sam Hartman 11. We had Tanner McKee from Stanford 12. Malik Cunningham from Louisville 13. Spencer Rattler from South Carolina 14. And then Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma 15. And there was clearly a big drop off. And there's some guys that we didn't have in here that are super talented that could jump into this mix with big years. Anthony Richardson's a guy that gets a lot of hype. He just hasn't done a whole lot, for me to feel that way. A guy that we didn't have in there, a lot of people probably think we're nuts on, is Will Levis, but neither Ryan nor I had him. You didn't have him in your top 15 either, correct?
I don't think you did. Not as a general college quarterback.
Yeah.
No. Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, that is our top 15. Got a super chat from Connor Patton. He says, looking at the season schedule, which teams can a Drew Pine-led Notre Dame beat, and which teams will they be defeated by? You want to take a crack at that one first, Ryan?
I think personally, and this might be a hot take, I don't know. I think a Drew Pine-led team can beat anybody on the schedule pretty regularly, aside from Ohio State and Clemson. Those are the 2 games where I think you need plus quarterback play. Like, you just can't have just solid to good quarterback play. Like, you need better than that to win those games. So I would say that I think Drew Pine could comfortably go 10-2 with this year's team. But I think in order for them to go 11-1 or maybe 12-0, we'll see what happens. You need Tyler Buckner. You need that dynamic element. So I would say 10 teams that Drew Pine could definitely beat, in my opinion.
I think so. And I don't think Notre Dame can't beat Ohio State. I mean, who would be the 2? Would you say it's definitely
Ohio
2,
State
or would you
Clemson.
say it's okay? So it's definitely those 2.
Yes.
I think it's a situation where between Ohio State, BYU, Clemson, and USC, you go 2-2 is kind of where I'm at. Maybe you beat Clemson because it's at home, but you lose to USC at the end of the year. I think it's something like that. Can Notre Dame beat all 4 of those teams with Drew Pine? I think so. It just is harder. You're going to need your defense to be even better, and you're just going to need other guys to really step up and play. I think Notre Dame can beat anybody with Drew Pine. It's just harder, and it's harder to do it week after week after week after week. That's the thing for me. So I don't want to make it seem like if Drew Pine starts, it's automatically they're done. I mean, they went 12-0 with Ian Book as a starting quarterback. I don't mean any disrespect, but Drew Pine can do that because they went 12-0 that year because of what was around him. And that's the thing is I think this team has some of that, like the 2012 team had some of that. But I don't think if you get into games where the offense is going to have to go win you the day against Ohio State, that he's good enough to do that. Right. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. So let's get down to some more questions, Ryan. And Connor, thank you for the super chat very, very much. I have another super chat from NRent520. He says, does Matt Salerno have the ability to be a Chris Fink type of receiver?
I haven't seen enough, Brian, to have a real opinion on this. Like I saw Matt Salerno in 1 practice. Other than that, I just haven't seen enough of him. You know what I mean? Like I haven't seen enough practices where I feel comfortable saying one way or the other. I mean, I know he had that one practice I went to, he had a heck of a touchdown catch in the back of the end zone over, I forget what corner it was, but like it was an impressive catch. But like I generally have not seen enough of Salerno.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I thought it was Jaden Mickey, but no, that's Tobias Merriweather beat him. No, I think it was. I don't know who it was. I'm going to go back and look. It might have been a safety. I'm going to go back and look at that one. I know what you're talking about. It was a nice catch. Look, Matt Salerno's a good football player. He's a good athlete. It's just he's not he's not that guy. To me, Chris Fink was a tremendous route runner, like a really, really good route runner. And I don't know if Matt is that guy. I'm with Ryan. I mean, you'd need to see more of him, but from what I've seen of him returning punts, I don't see the type of like I thought Chris Tyree short area explosiveness was really good.
Wasn't he like a 40-inch vertical guy, Fink, if I remember correctly? Like
He was
nice vertical,
he was pretty high, yeah. He was pretty high. So he was definitely up there, but he had, ran like a 4.57, I think is what his 40 time was, had really good shuttle times, all those type of things. Yeah, it's just but his short area quickness was really good, which is why he was such a good route runner. So, they're different types of athletes. I just don't think that he is that kind of guy. I don't. I really don't. But I also think that that's kind of what hurt you against Clemson a little bit in 2018 is because he wasn't Hunter Renfrow. He wasn't that kind of next level player that if they're taking your other guys out, he's going to go get himself open and just be that guy. And honestly, I thought Chris Fink was also, you got to remember where he came from.
Mm-hmm.
He played at the same high school Malik Zaire did. And I believe we're still an option team when Chris was coming out. So part of his issue about being a walk-on is he just didn't get the opportunities to show how good of an athlete he was because of playing at Kettering Alter. But I remember the first time I saw Chris Fink playing, I was like, yo, this kid's a Division I athlete. This kid is, he's small, but he's a Division I athlete. This kid can play. I have never gotten that vibe from Matt Salerno other than, but this kid's a walk-on, but he's a pretty good walk-on. Yeah. I always thought Chris Fink was like, that dude's a scholarship guy. And I think that's the difference between the two. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. We had, let's see here. We had another question from A100. He asked somebody else this, but I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this, Ryan. He said, would you put Rattler in your top 10? We've seen him play a couple times. What, other than recruiting rankings, what would be the case for Spencer Rattler as a top? Because I think we can make one. What if you were going to make a case for Spencer Rattler being a top 10 quarterback? What would it be?
Right. Well, I think that 2 years ago you saw a lot of positive signs. I mean, I think he threw like 28 touchdowns to 7 interceptions as a redshirt freshman. Like there were signs of really good stuff. And I think the biggest plus that you can say to try to get him in there, Brian, is that the kid is really talented. I mean, he can throw the football, man. He's got one of the best arms in college football, in my opinion. And it's just all the mental side with him, right? Like that's the big deterrent. I actually think he's a decent athlete too. Like, I don't think he's a great athlete, but like he can work off script a little bit. He can do some of those things. So from a talent perspective, you could still be on a top 10 quarterback. And I think 2 years ago going into last season, you were like, okay, if he takes the next step, like, yeah, sure. That looks like a good player, but it's just right now I couldn't put him in the top 10 just because last year was just so bad, man. Like it was just not great if we're being completely honest. So I have hope for him because I actually watched a little bit of the South Carolina spring game a couple of days ago because I wasn't able to catch it, but he looked comfortable and he's working in a pro style system now. And I know he's comfortable with Shane Beamer and he's kind of out of the spotlight a little bit, which I think is good going down to Columbia. So I have high hopes for Spencer Rattler. It's just, I have to see it first, I have to see it. That's why I wanted him to be in the top 15 because I think he's talented enough to be a top 10 quarterback.
And that was exactly our conversation because at first we weren't going to have him in there. And then we're like, okay, let's project this a little bit. And it's a good year at quarterback. I mean, there's not a bunch of elite guys, but there's a bunch of really good quarterbacks. So you can make a case for guys at 14 to be number 6. I mean, there's a lot. Like I would say after number 5, I don't necessarily think I'd lock anybody into like he's 6 and there's no doubt about it. And I'm not changing my mind. I think there's going to be a lot of movement as the season goes on because it is a good year. And I think he could be one of those guys. And look, he's playing in South Carolina. It's one of the lowest profile places in the SEC. He's not going to have the same attention onto him. And to your point, Ryan, he is in 2020 in only 11 games, he completed 67.5% of his passes for 3,031 yards, 9.6 yards per attempt, which is really good. 28 touchdowns, 7 picks, and he had a quarterback rating of 172.56.
Yep.
So for comparison's sake, so again, 67.5% completions, 9.6 yards per attempt, 172 quarterback rating. Last year, Caleb Williams is a freshman. Now, again, Spencer was a redshirt freshman in 2020. But last year as a freshman, Caleb Williams completed 64.5 of his passes. He averaged 9.1 yards per pass attempt and had a quarterback rating of 169.63. So, you just look at the production on a per play basis. The reality is he was a better player. He just I don't think he handled having Caleb Williams there very well, to be honest with you.
Mentally hurt him a little
Yes,
bit.
I think he felt like I have to force things. Like I have to, I have to. And he threw last year. Spencer Rattler completed 74.9% of his throws because he threw a lot of short stuff, but he threw 5 picks. And a guy that completes 74.9% of his throws should not be averaging 7.9 yards per attempt. That just tells you he was completing a lot of short stuff. But he threw 11 touchdowns and 5 picks. He threw 5 picks in 187 attempts the year before, and 317 attempts he only threw 7. And, I think a lot of it, Ryan, had to do with just the fact that I think he was pressing. And that's why I bring up the whole aspect of being at South Carolina, because there's not the same pressure on him. There's no other quarterback he's worried about. And you can take from that however you want, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. The reality is that it is the reality with Spencer Rattler, and I think that's going to take some of the pressure off. No one's expecting him to lead South Carolina to a national championship like he had that pressure to do at Oklahoma. And I think it's going to help him be productive. Now, the thing that's going to move him into the top 10 for me, Ryan, is he's going to have to lead them to an upset victory. He's going to have to beat somebody they're not supposed to beat, and he's going to have to play well against the best teams. His production this year, I bet, is going to be top 10 worthy. But how's he going to be in the big moments? That's going to be the big question for me. That's going to be the key.
He actually does quietly have a lot of talent around him, which is nice. Yeah. I mean, they have wide receiver Josh Van's a good football player. Jaheim Bell's a good tight end. Austin Stogner transferred from Oklahoma. They have the Marshawn Lloyd kid at running back. If he could ever stay healthy, he's a really talented player. And then they had Christian Beal-Smith that was at Wake Forest, who was a pretty good running back that just transferred over there as well. So he's got some talent to work with, man. Mm-hmm. I hope he can. I hope that he can fulfill his potential, Brian. I do, because if he's able to humble himself a little bit, he's got a lot of talent. I mean, there was a reason that people were so excited about him going into last year, because he can throw the football, man. He's got a great talent to him.
I always thought he was overrated from the standpoint of being like the number one quarterback in the class, but he was always talented. It was never about, he's overrated. He doesn't have ability. He's got ability. I just probably would have had him maybe second, third, or fourth in that class. That's technically overrated. It doesn't mean that you think a guy's not good. Like we were talking about that D tackle that just committed to an SEC school yesterday. I don't even want to say his name because it's disrespectful, but I'm like, there's one outlet that ranked him in the top 30. I'm like, that dude's not even a top 250 guy. That's the kind of overrated you think. So when I say overrated, I don't mean it like that. I think he was still a very good top 30 player coming out of high school. I just didn't think he should have been the number one quarterback in his class.
Fair.
But the talent is certainly there. The talent is certainly there. I want to bring this up because a lot of people are bringing it to the chat. Here's the deal, folks. This is our philosophy, and this is, I don't care what anybody else does. They're entitled to do whatever they want. All right, and this is not no disrespect to anybody else. Like I said, I'm going to run my business the way that I want to run it and how we choose to run it, and others can do that. And it's a free country, and you can do that. The one thing that we're adamant about, and I know Ryan supports this, is it is not our job. Because we're talking sports here, not real life. We're not covering some corrupt Watergate political thing, right? We're talking sports. If a kid is going to commit to a school or decommit from a school, we will say enough that you kind of have an idea what's coming, but we're not going to come out and say it because it's not our place to break that news. So anytime a kid is going to commit, we're not going to do crystal balls. We're not going to do projection machines or prediction machines and all that kind of stuff. We'll give you the intel. We dropped intel last night that let people know that there's some things in the works, okay? But we're not going to come out and report that. We're not going to respond to those questions because it's not our news to break. It is the young men that are making these decisions. It's their news to break. When they break it and they make it, we will talk about it. But we're not going to tell you who's going to commit. We're not going to tell you who's going to decommit. Other people want to do that. That's fine. That is their business. I am not criticizing those people. We just don't do that. And people need to understand that. And I know that most of you respect that, but that's why we're not talking about what you're all talking about in the chat. When the young man makes his decision, we'll address it one way or the other. So beyond that, we're just not going to discuss the topic that's being discussed there. It's, like I said, if you're on the message board last night, you have an idea of what's happening, and that's where we're going to leave it. Okay.
Mhm.
Milton Fan 15 asks, can Avery Davis redshirt and play next season?
So me and Brian actually talked about this, Milton. So here's the thing: Avery Davis would be in his 6th year. This year is his 6th year. So he had a red shirt, and then he has the COVID year, which is
Right.
why he was able to come back for his 6th year and have passed the 5 year of eligibility there. He can technically petition the NCAA to get a waiver to come back for a 7th year. The thing is, though, and Brian could probably fill in a little more, is that since only 1 year was lost fully to injury, that may be tough for him to get that waiver. It's not impossible, but there are some questions whether that petition would be granted to him to have the extra year.
Because I believe the rule is if you lose 2 years from medical, that's almost an automatic, you're getting your 6th year. It's not always the same when it's you just redshirted a year as a freshman and then had an injury. Avery's never had any other medical injury. Now, he did miss time last year because of an injury. I'm talking from a redshirt. So he got hurt in like game 8 or 9 last year, right? Yeah. So he clearly used up all of his eligibility. So he would be able to petition because this would be a second medical issue. It's just with the NCAA, and you all are going to be shocked that I'm going to say this, right? And I say this sarcastically. The NCAA is a little inconsistent on how they apply this rule. Shocker, I know. I know. Pick your jaws up off the ground. You're shocked that the NCAA is inconsistent with decision-making, right? That there's no method to their madness. I know that's a wild comment to make. The other thing is I don't know if Avery would want it, to be honest with you. I mean, this is now a second knee injury. I honestly, for me, I hope he does. I hope he tries to come back because I really believe that he's no chance of getting drafted now with 2 knee injuries in a row. Maybe he can come back and prove himself healthy. He'll either do one of 2 things: position himself to maybe sneak into the back of the draft. Because I think if he plays this year, he gets drafted. I've said that. I think he does. If he has a year we talk about, be a 5th to 7th round pick. No chance of that now. It made me hard for him to get signed, because he's going to miss so much of the last 2 years. And here's the other thing: he's a great kid. Would love to see him get to end his career by playing. And look, you're going to have a need next year. I'd rather take him back as a 7th year guy and have his leadership and his character, let him get a second master's degree, whatever the case may be, than go get some grad transfer to provide depth for a year. Because then it's like, hey, look, we can't promise you playing time because we don't know who you're going to be, but we would love to have you back because you're going to provide leadership and mentorship. And I mean, he's almost like a GA. I mean, he would be the age of most GAs. He's a 7th year senior. And you don't tell me he couldn't help Coach Stuckey with those kids, when he's not taking reps or whatever. I would love to have him back. I just don't know if that's what Avery wants to do. And what I mean is I don't even know if Avery knows what he wants to do. This just happened Friday, so I don't really know what he's going to do. I would take him back if I had the room, Ryan. I would. I
agree.
And the injury was so early that he's going to be a full year removed from the surgery by the time next year starts. Yep. He was coming back from an injury he had in October this last time, late October. And for those who don't know, he tore the second knee. So it was the opposite knee, I should say, of what he tore last year, which is even more unfortunate.
Which unfortunately happens when you overcompensate for an injury sometimes, unfortunately.
And it's hard to measure that. Like you can't, there's no test to show that's, that the stability of the other one, I don't believe is that way.
I don't think
so. So that's kind of where we're at. So
very unfortunate.
Yes, very much so. Connor Patton said, is there any word on Xavier Watts getting moved or not? I have not heard. Notre Dame has had practice today, so they kind of started interviewing shortly before we started the show. I haven't heard anything about that. I should actually, I'm going to ask Sean Stiers that question. Let me ask him real quick. All right, so I asked Sean Stiers, who was at the press conference today, but I have not heard anything yet about that. So I don't know what they're going to do. But I'll try to find out. And as soon as we find out, we'll definitely let y'all know, because that would be a very interesting conversation to have.
There is a couple interesting options, I think, right?
I think he's the only one that can help you right now. Like I've people mention Jaden Bellamy, who was a pretty decent high school receiver.
Sure.
But he doesn't help you right now. He's a freshman, right?
Yeah.
Like
I think you're mostly just supplementing passing game production in other ways, right?
Sure.
Like through running backs, through tight
Sure.
ends, like that type of
Right.
thing, you know. But
The reason I talk about Xavier is because I actually think he can move and play.
right.
Like I think Xavier can help you. He's got 3 years in the strength program. He's played in this offense before. I just don't think Jaden Bellamy would. I think you'd be putting him in a bad spot unless you plan on just moving him and keeping him there and say, look, we're going to move you there, and we're going to let you develop there. You're not going to help us much this year. Although he could be a good scout team guy, but he's not going to help you this year. I would actually be okay moving both of them, meaning one for now and then one for, because I'm not real high on Jaden Bellamy as a corner. I'm just not. Maybe it'd be a decent safety, but his body type is he's a safety talent in a cornerback's body.
Yeah,
I actually think he's a decent receiver where maybe he could be a slot receiver for you down the road. And so you're moving him now because you're the depth for the future. But you also know he's not going to help you really a whole lot this year, at least not early.
Right.
Then move Xavier because Xavier can help you now. I mean, you move Xavier Watts the receiver, and within a couple practices, I think he's caught up for at least enough to block, catch some screens, run some crossing routes, and run some go routes. So I think that Jaden Bellamy helps you fill out a roster, a depth chart better, but I don't know if he necessarily helps you this year win games. I think Xavier Watts, to me, can go help you win games. And I think you have enough depth at safety and corner to make both of those moves, in my opinion.
That's fair.
So that's kind of where I'm at. We have a comment here from Michael Holly. Says, love your channel. Thank you, Michael. Sitting here recovering from surgery, and you guys get me through my days. Sorry to hear about that, man. Sorry to hear that you've had your surgery. Hope you're healing well. And but we're glad to help. His question was, Ryan, and again, we'll be praying for you, Michael, and hope you have a speedy recovery. He said, will the freshmen get more of an opportunity to play now under the staff, or are their traits not there? I love the pettiness that he threw right there. That's so wonderful, Michael. So wonderful. Ryan, my expectation is that freshmen are going to have to earn it like everybody else, but they will be given an opportunity to earn it. They're not going to purposely hold back freshmen the way that I think we saw in past years. I don't think we will.
And that's one of my biggest things I'm looking forward to is, there were times, Brian, like let's call it what it is, where in the past I'm just like, why is that guy not playing until now? Like that guy couldn't have contributed in any capacity last year. Like there's been so many of those instances. I know you talked about Kyron Williams when he was a true freshman. Like he probably should have played a little bit, like he should have, at some point.
There's no need not to play him, especially when you go to the Georgia game and you have one healthy other running back in Tony Jones.
Right.
So you purposely chose not to try and run the ball against Georgia because your depth issues, because part of your depth issues were you refused to play Kyron more. And I actually think he might have actually got in early in that game, but they just weren't going to play him because they, and that was a Kelly decision, I was told. I was told the coaching staff wanted to play Kyron that year. I was told that by 2 coaches. Kelly vetoed that and said, nope, we're going to redshirt him. A running back.
So disappointing, man. Well, and I'll say this. With how much Coach Freeman has continued to reiterate competition, if a freshman earns it, I don't think that he'll shy away from playing them, because that's the whole thing about competition is, and players know this, right? If you continuously preach competition, and freshman is clearly one of the best players and he doesn't play, then the competition thing gets thrown out the window because you're like, but why didn't he earn that? Did he not? So in any capacity, if you're going to preach the competition thing, if a freshman is able to earn a spot, he needs to play. If not, you're not fulfilling your philosophy at that point. Like you are just kind of saying things to say it. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a couple freshmen that could potentially contend for playing time. I really do.
I hope so. That's the thing is I hope we see some freshmen. And look, we're already seeing it with Jaden Mickey. Yeah. They have not been afraid to throw Jaden Mickey onto the first team to get reps at nickel and outside, give him opportunities to earn playing time. It's not even like you held him back, but he just was too good and he forced him on the field. Like from the minute Jaden Mickey got here, he was like, okay, kid, show me what you got. And he stepped up and took advantage of those opportunities. Junior to Alamaka. They're giving him a legitimate chance to push the veterans in front of him. Will it end up paying off? Will he beat those guys out? Don't know. He's getting a chance. Tyson Ford. I've heard some really good things about Josh Burnham in fall camp so far. I fully expected Josh Burnham not even be a conversation piece because he just moved over to Viper late in the spring. But I've heard that kid's got a level of twitchiness that just you don't see a whole lot. Right now, Will he play a lot this year? I don't know. But if that kid's out there making plays every week, they're going to find a role for him. So, and then, of course, Benjamin Morrison's getting opportunities. Jalen Sneed's coming along. Nolan Ziegler had to miss a couple days because of an illness. But, like, when he's been healthy, like, these kids are getting – and, of course, Tobias Merriweather is getting a ton. And I was told by somebody that Jadarian Price wasn't just playing well for a freshman. Jadarian Price was challenging the veterans for starting job. Now, part of that was because Chris Tyree was hurt in the spring, but that he at times outplayed the other running backs in the spring, right? I mean, that's how good he was. And, of course, I guarantee you both of the freshman tight ends are going to play this year. So we're going to see the freshman class a lot. Some of it is out of need, if we're being honest. But I don't care how many receivers they had. Tobias Merriweather was going to play this year. I don't care if they had 9 receivers back on scholarship. Don't care. I mean, Jordan Johnson was back, and Lawrence Keys and all those guys were back. Jay Brunell, all the guys that transferred. Tobias Merriweather's going to play this year, so that's just the reality of it. So to answer your question, Michael, I agree with Ryan. I do think we're going to see them get an opportunity. Now it's up to them to say, you've been given it. What are you going to do with it? And that's what wasn't happening in the past, Ryan. It was just, they didn't take advantage of the opportunity. You got to be given an opportunity to earn it.
Take advantage of it. Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. So, it's not always as simple as people make it out to be.
I'm really interested in seeing the Joshua Burnham thing at Viper, though, man. Like I think eventually what I'm sorry, but
that's all good.
What
I know it's on your mind.
What Isaiah Foskey is at Viper is eventually what maybe the big end might look like more, and you might get a guy like a Joshua Burnham who's more of that drop end Viper type, right? Because I mean, we talked about like, why is Isaiah Foskey in coverage so much? It's the design of the defense, blah, 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 blah. Well, Joshua Burnham could actually do that stuff, and he could probably do it really, really well. So interesting player in that spot.
When he's long, he's athletic, and then Aiden Gobira, I've heard he's got a long way to go size-wise, strength-wise, but I heard some really good things about him recently as well, that, like maybe this isn't the year he plays because you've got, you have Justin Adamiola, you have Isaiah, I almost did it too. You have Isaiah Foskey, Burnham, he may need a year, but he's like, I have yet to hear from anyone. And look, I'll be honest with you, usually 2 weeks in the fall camp, I always get some kind of note like, this guy isn't quite where we had hoped he would be. You always hear that. I've yet to hear that about any of the guys on defense.
Awesome.
Any of them that we like. And I'm only saying that about defense because I haven't been able to ask about any of the freshmen on offense other than guys we've already talked about, right? Mm-hmm. So like Tobias, the tight end, they're all doing really well. Like the linemen, way too early for them. It's more the skill that you start to hear that because you see like, wow, athletically, this guy is not where we thought he was or where he was going to be.
Because it's a quicker transition. Lineman is like a longer development.
Right, because you're getting hit in the face by like Billy Stroud doesn't go against guys that were bigger than him in high school very often, if ever.
Right.
He's doing that every day at Notre Dame, with the different.
I'll say this, Brian. I know that we've talked about, Ty Chan playing more inside the start. I saw him next to Blake Fisher, though, in a picture. I was like, oh, that's a big boy, man. Yeah, that's a big boy.
Yes, there's no doubt. There's no doubt about it. There's a question about Xavier Watts here from Jamie Nelson. And Jamie said, could Watts play both sides of the ball, possibly just come in for some different receiving package? I'd be okay with that, too. Like, personally, and this is probably my bias, because of how good I think he could be at receiver. As soon as you start thinking about him, my bias kicks in. Like I think you're going to have to kind of play him at least early on, let him focus over there to get caught up to speed to the terminology and stuff. But could I see a scenario in which he is needed at safety and receiver? And a receiver, he's giving you 20 snaps a game, and he can run a hitch, a slant, a now screen, a go route, a cross, and a drag. It's not that complicated. And he can go block because Xavier's going to block, right? I mean, he's going to battle. And he's got really good ball skills for a kid who's only about 6 feet tall. Like I was told he would like win one-on-ones all the time against DBs at 6 foot. He's a tough, strong kid. So my bias, Jamie, makes my answer automatically no. And I think I said this Saturday when we were talking about it. I was like, no, he's got to play one side. But if I take my bias away and I take a step back from my gut reaction, Ryan, I do think it's possible that Xavier could help you out at both spots, especially if he's not a starter on either side. I do think there could be that a little bit.
It's fair. It's fair. I really struggle with the both sides of the ball type of thing sometimes, to your point. Like I guess maybe it's the former coach, I guess, type of thing, where I'm just like, I want a guy to just focus on one thing and be really good at one thing. But if you're in this position, Jamie, I think Brian makes a solid point where you can compartmentalize his role as an offensive player, where like you can get reps out of him and you can have that type of thing, but also you're not still taking the development away from him at safety. That's like what you like long term. So I think there is some merit to that. I do.
Mm-hmm. Then a follow-up question we get a lot, and this is a good one from Sean Kane. He says, if you move Watts to receiver, and again, this is all ifs. We have not heard anything that this is going to happen. So this is just hypotheticals talking in a show. If you move Watts to receiver, then do you need to move a young corner like Riley to safety because they may lose Joseph, Houston, and TJ after this year? That's a really good point. To me, there are some safeties. There are some corners that I think it's time to move to safety. I think it's time to move Philip Riley to safety. Yeah. I think when you look at Mickey and Morrison doing really well, Barnes and Chance Tucker, I've heard, are both doing really well. They're redshirt freshmen. They have 4 years of eligibility. They have 4 corners on the roster right now that have 4 years of eligibility left. And you got 2 dudes coming in next year that I think in certain ways could help you out early on. I think it's kind of like Philip Riley is too good of an athlete not to find a role for. And I think this is kind of what we talked about when he signed. I want to see him get a shot at corner. But if he can't stick, move him to safety because he's a strong kid. I think if I was gonna move Xavier full time to receiver and like, look, dude, we're making this move and it's the last time we're moving you. Like you're just this is where you're going to be. Then I would definitely look at moving Philip Riley to safety. I definitely would do that because I think that's where he probably has the best chance to play.
I've talked a little bit about Riley also kind of playing a little bit in the nickel at times too. And I think that you can make it kind of interchangeable with the safety position too, right?
Because they'll both play nickel. You have safeties playing nickel and corners playing nickel. You're absolutely right, Ryan.
And I mean, you could even, depending what package you're in, Brian, like if you're in base, you could also just, play single high and roll him down into it being a nickel, like kind of a rotation down. So I think Riley's a really physical player, man. He's well put together. I liked him a lot coming out of high school. So I would like to find a spot for him too. Maybe he's a guy that could also cross train a little bit between that nickel and the safety position. So I think it's an interesting player to keep an eye on as far as long-term development is concerned. I mean, it makes sense. His style definitely fits at safety, if we're being honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I just think the transition of what they're trying to do defensively, I think it would just fit a little bit better as well. Ryan Loftus said, might be an unpopular opinion, but Jaden Thomas is going to be a viable wide receiver too. He's going to break out. I don't think it's unpopular. I think it's maybe not common because he's just not a guy a lot of people talk about. But I've never heard anyone say that they don't want Jaden Thomas to break out or that he won't break out. I don't think that at all. I think maybe it's a little uncommon because most people are focusing on, Lorenzo, Braden, guys that have been here and played before. My whole thing with Jaden Thomas is I just got to see him do it in a game. I mean, the kid has literally never played a snap of college football, but everything I hear, and Ryan and I talked about this, which is why the blue gold game was so important for him in our view, is we've been hearing since last December about how good Jaden Thomas looks. He's healthy. He's making plays. He's really athletic, all these other things. It's like, I've never seen the kid play. He never played a snap of college football yet. Then we heard the same thing in the spring, and then the couple practices you guys were at this spring, he just didn't really do anything to stand out. Then he gets to the blue gold game and it's like, okay, that's what they're talking about. Now we understand what they're talking about. And then we saw it in the first practice. I mean, Vince said I think it was Vince. Was it Vince or Sean? I think it was Vince said in the first practice that, like, dude, the most impressive guy they had today was Jaden Thomas. He was the guy making the most plays. I think Vince that said that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that's not. I was told by somebody at one point in time, and we'll see if this was when Avery Davis was still healthy. I had somebody say to me, "Don't be surprised if at some point in time this year the starting receivers are Jaden Thomas, Lorenzo Styles, and Tobias Merriweather." Because the thought would be, Braden and Lorenzo kind of moving in and out. Braden, kind of doing what we've talked about, managing the reps, and then kind of having him be your big play guy off the bench. I don't know if I would go there or if that would be the case, but look, there's a lot. No one at Notre Dame is counting out Jaden Thomas. And I actually had a buddy I know today who's got some connections who texted me. He's like, yeah, they love Jaden Thomas. So I don't think it's unpopular at all, Ryan. And I think you could be onto something. Kids, look, I gave him a 4-star grade coming out of high school, despite the fact he didn't do much of anything as a senior. And this is the thing that people have to understand. The whole, I've never seen him do a whole lot, isn't just about what he's done at Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. We didn't get a chance to see him do much in high school either. because he was banged up his last couple years. I mean, in 2020, he only played 7 games because of COVID, and he was dealing with turf toe all year. So he caught 28 passes for 432 yards. As a junior in 2019, he only played 5 games because of an injury, and he only caught 21 passes for 238 yards and 1 touchdown. I mean, his best year was his sophomore year when he had 42 catches for 696 yards and 5 touchdowns. That's not the production of a guy that you're going to say he's going to go to Notre Dame and be a dude.
Stud, yeah.
Right? But the tools were always there. I mean, he was a center fielder for their baseball team. He got recruited by some D1 schools to play baseball. Notre Dame talked to him about maybe playing baseball. It's just the kid is never healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big thing. It's hard for me to project a kid. Like, it'd be a total homer move for me to watch a kid who basically was injured for the last 2 years of his high school career and say, that's going to be a dude. But but the talent was there, Ryan, which is why he earned a 4-star grade. Because you could see it when in the few games he was healthy, you're like, if this kid can stay healthy, he's got some talent. And that's what makes him unique.
And he supplements a lot of opportunities from we talked about the depth concerns of wide receiver now, even more than it was. Jane Thomas is the type of kid that can line up everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So that could also help with depth issues, the fact that you have a player that is versatile, lineman versatile. So, yeah, I mean, look, Ryan, like, I am very much hoping that Jane Thomas is a breakout star because Notre Dame needs a couple of these wide receivers to break out. Like, they need it. And this type of kid, again, is the player. If him and Lorenzo Styles are the 2 guys that could break out this year, like really break out, they're guys that both of them can move around a ton. Yeah. So you can do a lot of things with those two different types of players. So I really hope that you are right that Jane Thomas is a breakout star.
Right. Because to your point, like, let's say Dion and Tobias both ball out at W. You play Jaden at X and Z. I mean, he can literally play both of those positions. Let's say that Dion and Tobias don't ball out. You can put him at W. Mm-hmm. I mean, he really can do a lot of different things, and that makes him unique. So, to Ryan's point, they need at least one of him and Dion to step up. If not, up to between Dion, Jaden, and Tobias Merriweather, they need 2 of them to be ready to play this year. And not ideally all 3, but they need at least 2 to be ready to play this year. Mm-hmm. So there's no doubt about it. Chief Brody did give us a super chat at the beginning, and I completely missed it. Chief, I apologize, buddy. What's good, boys? Talking ball, man. That's always good. That's always fun. We had an interesting question here from Christopher Galloway. I liked this one, Ryan. Christopher Galloway says, Brian, if the offense was just looking at speed, who would be on the field? I think that's very fascinating. So the quarterback is easy, Tyler Buckner. Running back is easy, Chris Tyree. You're definitely going to have Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey on the field. Yeah. A week ago, if you'd have asked this question, I would have said Avery Davis would be in the slot. I'd put Lorenzo at boundary, Braden at X, and I'd have Avery in the slot because Avery was a sub 4.5 guy. Now that he's out, I think it's a little bit more of a question mark. And
Tobias at W, maybe.
Or Jaden at W, because I think they're similar in the speed category. Neither of them are burners.
Sure.
And at tight end, if you're just going for speed,
Eli Raritan
probably putting it. And we're not even making a joke about the 10-yard split. I mean, just honestly, if they all ran 40 times today, I think either him or Kane Barong would be the fastest. It'd be one of those 2.
Agreed.
Now, I'd still put Michael Mayer there because I'd give me a little bit of beef to protect the speed. And I don't care. I mean, Michael Mayer is just good at everything. I mean, he can do whatever he wants. Yep. But if it's just about speed, right, to answer Chris's question, then I think Raritan or Barong would be the picks.
All right.
That's a fast unit, dude. Like, that's some flat speed right there. If all those guys are on the field at the same time.
Yes. All right. Offensive line. We got to do it.
No.
Come on.
No. Offensive line doesn't count. You're just looking for the best players.
Athletes,
if we're just talking about speed, though, I mean, you're going to have Emil Wagner somewhere, right? If we're being serious, you're going to have them there. You're going to have Ashton Craig probably there. I mean, pick your most athletic guys, and that's really going to be it. But whatever. Joe Alt, former tight end, is probably in that conversation. He's like legitimately in that conversation. But
Jared Patterson can run too.
Yeah,
so
we're with offensive linemen. We're not going for speed. We're going to go for guys who can protect that speed. How about that?
That's fair.
Right. See, Ryan's always trying to start stuff. Absolutely love it.
I'm just trying to give the big men some
I
credit,
get it.
Man. They're athletes too.
I get it. I'm with you. Let's got a couple more here before we get out of here. Mr. 2.0, very fair question. He goes, am I the only one that thinks people are underrating USC this year? And if so, why am I wrong? Well, number one, all the ranking services would agree with you because they have USC in the top 15. ESPN has them in the top 5 of the season. So I think it's mostly Notre Dame fans. I think it's probably what he's referring to.
Mm-hmm.
So why Ryan is he wrong for thinking that USC, let's just say from a Notre Dame fandom, because I think where his point is very valid is I think most Notre Dame fans, at least in our chat and on our board, including us,
Mhm.
don't think USC is going to all of a sudden be a top 10 football team this year. So
No.
we get why people feel that way. Quarterback, skill players, all that stuff, right? But why, if we're right and he's wrong,
Mhm.
what would be the reasons why?
Because I'm a traditionalist that I understand the need for a really good quarterback. I think Caleb Williams can be that. We saw flashes of that last year. You need skill position players. Good there. But I am a traditionalist in the fact that I believe that an offensive line and a defense are still paramount to winning football games, right? So I think when you're looking at the USC offensive line, they have Andrew Voorhees. That's a pretty highly rated player. I think he's a good, solid offensive lineman. Other than that, I don't think there's a ton of good offensive linemen around him. And I think the defense is not great from a talent perspective. So you are missing a great defense. You are missing a very good offensive line. You have limitations, I think, in both the departments. So I think that will limit a little bit of what the offensive firepower can bring. So that is why I am hesitant on USC, just because I think that places that are still paramount to being good at football, I don't think they have a lot of talent in that department.
What he said. Next question. We have a super sticker from Ryan Loftus. Ryan, you know it's not often that somebody can answer a question that I was going to comment on, and I'm like, well, he nailed it. So well done. Very well done. Ryan Loftus with a super sticker. Ryan, thank you very, very much for that. I believe this is going to be our last one from 99 Probs BK1. Sorry behind and catching up. Regarding Lions, would a Chris Olave from Ohio State be a good comp, assuming Lions hits his ceiling?
That's not. So I'll say I think Lions is a little longer, so he might be a little bit of a different player, but I can get with the smoothness part of it, right? Like I think he kind of lulls you to sleep as a route runner and just kind of as a long speed type of guy, 99 problems. So I can get there with that comp. I do think that Lions is a little bit longer. And I mean, Chris Olave was, I never saw him coming out of high school, but like at least the college version of him, he was very refined, right? Like he had a high floor because he just good route runner, consistent separator, all those good things. So I can't.
And he was always that way, Ryan.
Was he?
I mean, I don't know about high school, but even as a freshman, when he got on the field late, like the kid could run routes.
100%.
He could run routes.
So I think that style wise, though, there's some tangible. I like it. I can get there. I think there's smoothness. I think there's upside as a route runner. And I think it's kind of like sneaky speed. I know Olave ended up running like 4.39, but like I thought Olave kind of like lulled you to sleep as an athlete down the field a lot. And I could see that with a Tayshaun Lions. So I kind of like that comp. I think there's some merit there.
Very good question. Very good answer. Very well done all around. So Matt D has it nailed, folks. Hit that like button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Subscribe to the channel. You'll never want to miss a live show. Join the IB message board. We have a lot going on. A lot of the questions that people want asked, we talk about there because we have a business to run. And that's kind of what we do. And we want to have a place that is sort of a bit of a private club that you're welcome to join. And you'll get all this stuff as soon as we get it. And tons of insight. We dropped a little bit of a team intel piece, Ryan, yesterday. Did you get a chance to check that out? Some interesting stuff in there. And then, of course, we'll always keep doing some digging here as we get closer and closer to the season. So, and then, of course, you can just get a chance to talk ball all day with fellow Notre Dame fans. And who doesn't want a piece of that? So thanks, everybody, so much for being with us today. 6 o'clock tonight, Sean Stiers, Vince D'Addario are going to talk about Notre Dame. They're going to talk more about the quarterback. They're going to talk about Avery Davis. Where does this team go next? Talk about the press conferences, all that different stuff. So you get to talk to them tonight. And then we'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and we're going to talk about we're going to kind of stay on offense this week. We're going to go off quarterbacks today. We're going to talk about the skill players tomorrow, running backs, receivers. Talk about the O-line, tight ends on Wednesday. And then Thursday, we're going to have some fun. We're going to do our all-opponent team of the other team's offenses. So we're going to kind of give you a clue of who are the top offensive players that are going to face. We'll begin with just the all-opponent team. Then we'll have some fun at the end and say, where would Notre Dame guys be if they were included in this list? And we'll have some fun with that there. And then next week we'll do defense. We'll go D-line, linebacker, secondary, and then all opponent team defense. So that gives you a glimpse into what this next week is going to be like. So make sure you are locked in, everybody. Hit that like, subscribe, notification. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review and subscribe to the CFB Nation channel on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So definitely check that out. We're going to have some stuff dropping this week. For Ryan, I'm Brian. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.